Chapter 443. This thought made Gong Che disheartened. For so many years, he always thought that Gong Dai was on par with him. Even when Gong Dai did not fight back, he let down his guard and thought that Gong Dai was only SOSO. But today, he knew how terrifying Gong Dai was. If he did not have a weapon in his hands, he could also retreat easily. What a joke! He treated him as an opponent, but the other party did not care about him at all. Was there anything more humiliating than this? I'm going to kill you. Gong Dai. I'm going to kill you. This person was definitely his biggest obstacle, no matter in which aspect. Kill him. Gong Dai smiled. Rainwater flowed from his lips to his chin. His tone was quiet, but it was so dangerous that it made people tremble. You should be glad. He smiled like a demon, but his face was as beautiful as a fairy. If it wasn't for her, I think I would be happy to use your body to test this weapon. At that moment, in this potholed rainy ground, one was on top, one was on the bottom. It was very close, but also very far. There was a gap in between. It was a fight to the death. Gong Yimo's hands gradually weakened. This could not go on. There were too many people on the other side. They were like maggots attached to bones. It was annoying. Especially when they were covering two people, it made people even more anxious. Gong Yimo. Be careful. Bai Chio saw a cold knife in the dark. With Bai Chio's reminder, Gong Yimo avoided it. Her heart was burning with anger. She killed a gap and used her inner strength to transmit her voice. I'll say it again. I'm here to save Bai Ji. Liu Jin tried to kill Bai Ji. You are helping the Avildor. Many people hesitated. But Liu Jin was not someone to be trifled with. He immediately shouted, General Bai is my adoptive father. He treated me well. Now that my adoptive father died in the hands of this traitor who pretended to be a princess, she must want to take my adoptive father's corpse to claim credit. You must let her blood splatter on the spot. The soldiers' eyes were red. At this moment, they naturally believed Liu Jin, so they charged over. Gong Yimo was truly enraged. In the next moment, her murderous aura seemed to have solidified. At first, she still held back, but since these people didn't know what was good for them, she might as well just kill them. Many people who were near were intimidated by Gong Yimo's soaring killing intent. Even the swords in their hands began to tremble. However, military orders were absolute and they could not retreat. Sorry. Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with a bloody light. She was like an Azura. Not only did she stop retreating, she raised her saber and charged forward. Her sudden approach caused many people to retreat. Kill her. Liu Jin was afraid of Gong Yimo and hid far away. But this time, Gong Yimo did not show any mercy. Under the moonlight, she was like a blade fairy. Her gorgeous palace dress was dyed red with blood. She had a demonic beauty. Just one look and it would be etched in a lifetime. Bai Chio knew that now was not the time to run away. If it was any other time, even if he had to carry his father on his back, he would still go back and help her. But her awe-inspiring manner made him understand that even if he went back, he would only be a burden. So for the first time in his life, he suppressed his impulse and escaped with Bai Ji. Gong Yimo's massacre was very shocking. She killed in and out of the troops alone with her saber. She was like a human weapon. Military advisor Lu was finally afraid. Let's retreat. She is too scary. We are no match for her. He was already scared out of his wits. Liu Jin pushed him away. His eyes were about to pop out. Why should we retreat? If she doesn't die today, we will be the ones to die in the future. Gong Yimo was in the middle of a bloody battle. She could not hear or see clearly. She seemed to have mastered the rhythm of killing. Every time her sword drew blood, there was the beauty of death. Finally, when she killed nearly 100 people in an instant, all the soldiers were afraid. They hesitated and did not dare to move forward. Was this person even human? In just a short while, the ground was already full of corpses. The moon was as bright as day, illuminating the corpses on the ground. Gong Yimo stood among them. When the wind blew, her whole body was stained with blood. But she was like a celestial being flying in the sky. She was definitely injured, but she did not care. She was the kind of person who would lose all sense of pain once she started killing. Just like now, there was a dagger at her waist. She took it out in front of everyone and casually threw it on the ground. It made a deep sound. Everyone's heart seemed to have fallen to the bottom of a valley in an instant. Her murderous aura condensed. It seemed that every time she killed someone, the sin of killing on her body would get heavier and heavier. When she swept her gaze, no one dared to look at her. They only felt that she was a god, invincible. As for them, they were just throwing eggs at a rock. They were just courting death. Still want to play? She flung the blood on her sword. That cold voice made everyone retreat again and again. When Liu Jin saw that those people were afraid of being killed, he also became timid. Go. Kill her. Kill this demoness. Gong Yimou smiled. It was really a title that she had not heard for a long time. In this life, she wanted to be a saint. She heard a lot of gratitude, but in her previous life, she was always a demoness. When she smiled, a wind rose from the ground. It seemed to spiral with her as the center. The soldiers felt that the wind was like a blade. They were shocked and kept retreating. It's just a corpse. Are you sure you want to add more casualties for a corpse? Her light words made people's hearts waver. Her eyes flashed with a bloodthirsty light, adding more fuel to the fire. It's okay. If you want to die, I don't mind sending you on your way. As soon as she finished speaking, the inner strength transformed into a violent wind whistled. They had never heard of such a high level of skill. They only felt that it was as if a deity had descended to the world. Finally, when the biting cold wind cut through their clothes, it also seemed to have broken their last line of defense. Everyone retreated. Monster. She must be a monster. After fighting for so long and suffering so many casualties, she seemed to be fine. She could even use inner strength to transform her body. Could she be an old monster from the legends? Gong Yimou smiled and took a step forward. Those people took a step back. No matter how much Liu Jin scolded them from behind, they held their blades and did not dare to take a step forward. Gong Yimou walked forward calmly. The smell of blood on her body was oppressive. It made everyone retreat again and again. She actually created a path. She walked neither fast nor slow. The clothes on her body moved without wind. That was the demeanor of an expert. Her killing intent was overwhelming, making them want to kneel down and surrender. Just like that, she walked out of the encirclement. Gong Yimou suddenly turned around. It was so far away that he should not be able to see clearly. However, Liu Jin felt that her eyes fell on him. It made his back stiffen and his breathing stop. You should be glad. Her clear voice was sent to his ears by her inner strength. It was like the music of death, making him shudder. If it wasn't for the fact that I didn't want to kill all of Bai Ji's subordinates, tonight would be the day you die. Liu Jin's legs went soft and he fell to the ground. He did not doubt that if it wasn't for Bai Ji, Gong Yimou would have killed him from the start. Now, he did not have Bai Ji as his trump card. Gong Yimou also escaped. What awaited him was only death. Chapter 444. After saying this sentence, Gong Yimou turned and left. But with every step she took, the aura of her body increased layer by layer, making it impossible for anyone to resist. In the end, the army watched her leave. The ground was full of corpses and the smell of blood was overwhelming. However, no one dared to ask her for an explanation. Until her figure was swallowed by the night, the murderous aura gradually disappeared. Many people were sweating profusely, as if they had just escaped from death. Was there really such a powerful person? Many people were trembling in fear, but they were still silent and did not dare to speak. Was it really that easy? Gong Yimou's mouth was bleeding non-stop. The more she wiped, the more blood there was. The aura just now was at least at the 7th level. However, in order to frighten everyone, she used her inner force to create an illusion of deterrence when she was injured and exhausted, which worsened her internal injury. Now that she had left the crowd, her entire body was dispirited, and exhaustion could be seen between her brows. However, she could not stop, because that Liu Jin was very smart. Once he regained his senses, he would definitely pursue her without restraint. She had to go further away and hide. On the other side, Bai Chio was already burning with anxiety. He was quite familiar with this area and found a bush to hide. However, after so long, Gong Yimo still did not come out. The monkey was sleeping by his feet. Obviously, it had fallen asleep. Bai Chio could not leave, so he could only ask the monkey for help. You should go and find her. Bai Chio was quite gentle to the little monkey. However, when the little monkey saw someone disturbing its sleep, it clawed at Bai Chio. There were 3 bloody marks on Bai Chio's hand. It was painful and numb. Bai Chio was angry. If you don't find her, she will die. Can you bear to see her die? Only then did the little monkey move. She couldn't die, therefore, it angrily got up and went out to find her. It felt that it was so difficult to raise a person. It had to worry about everything. It followed the blood trail and found Gong Yimo. At this time, Gong Yimo was holding onto a tree and seemed to have fainted. However, the monkey did not know. It was shocked and quickly called Bai Chio to help. This trip was really tiring for the monkey. On the other side, when everyone walked out from the shadow of death, Liu Jin was the first to realize that something was wrong. If Gong Yimo was really that powerful, it wouldn't have taken so much effort to retreat with Bai Chio and the others in the beginning. Moreover, if Gong Yimo was really that powerful, how could she be injured? Thinking about it carefully, there were many suspicious points. Suddenly, a possibility flashed in Liu Jin's mind. Could it be that Gong Yimo wasn't that powerful at all? Could it be that he had taken some secret medicine to temporarily increase his power? The more he thought about it, the more likely it seemed. Otherwise, she wouldn't have let go of such a good opportunity to kill him. He had been tricked. Liu Jin could no longer sit still and sent troops to search for Gong Yimo's whereabouts. When things reach an extreme, Gong Yimo must be very weak right now. Since he and Gong Yimo had already gotten to this point, he could only kill her. The soldiers were still a little unwilling, but after listening to Liu Jin's analysis, they felt that it was reasonable. One after another, they left. In their hearts, they were a little angry at Gong Yimo for scaring them. She had to be caught. When Bai Chio saw Gong Yimo's lifeless appearance, he was scared out of his wit. He went over to check her breathing. When he found that she was only unconscious, he heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he brought Gong Yimo to his father's place. Now that there were 2 injured people, what should he do? Bai Chio frowned. On the other side, the little monkey was very straightforward and directly gave Gong Yimo a claw. Gong Yimo slapped the little monkey with her back hand and pressed it to the ground, unable to move. Although there was a claw mark on its face, it was awake. She faintly glanced at the little monkey. Little monkey, it must have wanted to scratch her claw for a long time, right? However, she didn't have time to bicker with a monkey. Right now, she had to think of a way to escape. Bai Chio said, "You said that some people loyal to father were sent to patrol the border. If we can find them, we will be safe." Gong Yimo thought about it and felt that it made sense. Hence, she stood up shakily and said to Bai Chio, "You can take your father with you. I can walk on my own." Bai Chio retracted his hand and nodded. Then, he led the way. Although the little monkey was hit by Gong Yimo, it still jumped onto her shoulder and walked together. Under the cover of the forest, they continued to head north. However, very soon, the pursuers arrived. Gong Yimo heard the sound. There were quite a lot of people coming. It was obvious that they were determined to catch them, and Bai Chio was carrying 2 injured people, so they couldn't go far. Gong Yimo made a prompt decision and stuffed the gold medal into Bai Chio's hand. "Take the gold medal and go find those people to help. Your father and I will stay behind. Don't worry, I have a way to stall for time." Bai Chio was of course unwilling. "No, I will stay behind. You go." Gong Yimo glared at him. "Can you not let your emotions affect your decisions? Those people must know you, right? They don't know me. I will only waste time if I go." Bai Chio felt that leaving these 2 injured people here was clearly a dead end. They had already confronted Liu Jin. Now, in order to survive, Liu Jin would definitely kill Gong Yimo if he met her. He couldn't do that. "This is an order," Gong Yimo suddenly said seriously. Under the moonlight, her small face was pale. Her arrogance was still there. Her decision couldn't be changed. Bai Chio suddenly felt a lump in his throat. Gong Yimo and his Bai family were not related. But now, the one who betrayed them was his father's adopted son. The one who saved them was an outsider, and a woman. Bai Chio suddenly knelt down. Princess's kindness, Bai family will never forget it. This time, please let me stay. Princess is precious and shouldn't be involved in this. The night wind blew her clothes. She stood there covered in blood. But her expression was indifferent. Her beauty was like a fairy who was about to ascend to immortality. She sighed and shook her head. You go. I can guarantee that I will survive. Can you? He couldn't. Gong Yimo helped Bai Chio up. She looked into his eyes and said softly, Who said that women are not as good as men? You, watch carefully. As she said that, she used her inner force and pushed him far away. Bai Chio looked at her blood-stained sleeves. She turned around resolutely and led his father into the depths of the forest. At that moment, her back was tall and clear. It was the only memory of a woman in his mind. Bai Chio finally left. Gong Yimo tried her best to hide Bai Ji in the bushes. She let Little Monkey keep watch while she buried some hidden weapons. Finally, she sat under a big tree. Her skirt spread out. She took some medicine. Then, she tore the cloth that was tied around her waist and began to apply the medicine on herself. When the pursuers caught up, what they saw was such a beautiful scene. A woman knelt down, her black hair draped over her shoulders. Her clothes were bright red, and her small face was fair and clear under the moonlight. Her expression was peaceful, but the wounds on her body were bleeding. The combination of these tragic and calm colors was the thickest and most colorful brushstroke between heaven and earth. Chapter 446. Gong Yimo clenched her teeth as she watched him take off his clothes. The taste of blood in her mouth had yet to dissipate, but now it was filled with a sweet taste. There were still a few hundred people who did not dare to come over. But here, under the tree, Liu Jin was actually shameless enough to take off his clothes in front of a few hundred people. Gong Yimo closed her eyes and tried to adjust her breathing. She would catch him off guard later, but she was too tired. Her head was dizzy. When she closed her eyes, she had a feeling that she did not want to open them. She frowned and sat under the tree. She leaned against the tree trunk like a lifeless porcelain doll. But she was so beautiful that it was shocking. She was so fragile and tough that people could not take their eyes off her. Even Liu Jin was stunned. He who was about to take off his pants could not help but lower his head and reach out to pinch her chin. At this moment, a cold light flashed in Gong Yimo's eyes. A dagger appeared out of thin air. She was going to cut off his hand. Ah! Liu Jin screamed and retreated. Gong Yimo opened her eyes. She was a little surprised. Her attack missed because someone was one step ahead of her. An arrow was shot and pierced through Liu Jin's palm. Gong Yimo turned around and saw Bai Chio standing there with a bow and arrow. His face was serious and his chest was still moving up and down violently. But he caught up. And when he saw Liu Jin taking off his clothes and wanting to take advantage of Gong Yimo, he shot an arrow without thinking. He wanted to teach him a lesson. Liu Jin fell to the ground and pulled out the arrow from his palm. He stared at Bai Chio and wanted to eat his flesh. It's you again. Good, I will take care of you together. Just when he was about to explode, many people rushed over. Liu Jin took a look and saw that it was Wen Tiantian who was loyal to Bai Ji. That guy had seen Bai Chio before. He only had a few hundred people rushing over. Wen Tiantian was patrolling the border and had a few thousand people under him. He could not fight them head-on. That Bai Chio had the ability to get Wen Tiantian here. He gritted his teeth and glanced at Gong Yimo. She was holding a dagger in her hand. She was not someone to be trifled with. He glanced at Bai Chio again. Bai Chio pulled out an arrow again and aimed at him. Liu Jin was extremely unwilling, but he still turned around and fled. Bai Chio was flustered and did not chase after them. Gong Yimo was relieved. She waved her hand and the dagger she used to sneak attack fell to the ground, destroying the last trap. The sound of the explosion made Bai Chio rush in front of her. Are you all right? He didn't dare to reach out to touch her. At this moment, she was as fragile as a person made of snow. His voice was so soft that it would startle her. When Gong Yimo saw that it was Bai Chio, she felt relieved and fainted. Bai Chio quickly held her in his arms. At the last moment, he heard her softly call out 2 words. Gong Dai, Your Highness, what's wrong? They were all extremely excited about the counterattack. At this time, they also guessed that the weapon in their prince's hands must be the divine weapon in the princess's hands that everyone coveted. All of them were extremely excited. I'm fine. Gong Dai shook his head. Just now, he seemed to have heard the royal sister calling him, but how could that be? She was in Yuchi right now, he smiled. Could it be that thinking of someone would cause hallucinations? At this moment, the rain had stopped. They had to hurry and meet up with the main group. Xiao Qi was a talkative person. He still hasn't woken up from the power of the attack just now. His face was full of excitement, but because Gong Dai ordered him not to say anything, he could only ask something else. Your Highness, are we really going to build the road next? It was very boring and not fun at all. Gong Dai glanced at him. You go to Shiju and do something. When Xiao Qi heard that there was a new task, he quickly asked, what is it? Gong Dai gave his command token to him. Pass down this prince's order. Choose 3,000 elites from this prince's 30,000 troops and secretly come to Long City. This prince has a use for them. Could it be that he wants to build a private army? Build a private army that can have a body? Xiao Qi's eyes lit up. He nodded repeatedly. But he still asked, I thought your highness would go to Yuchi to look for Princess Yuchi after leaving the capital. Gong Dai glanced at him coldly. He immediately stopped talking. After a while, when Xiao Qi thought that the prince was angry, Gong Dai said faintly, I also want to go. His voice was almost inaudible. But he couldn't go. Yuchi hadn't started the war yet because both sides were evenly matched. But if he went, not only would it aggravate the conflict, he might also be misunderstood by the people of Yuchi as Daiyu state wanting to start a war. Royal sister wouldn't want to see that scene, so he couldn't go now. But now was now, and the future was the future. As long as Yuchi started the war, he would help whoever royal sister wanted to help. No one would be able to blame Daiyu state. But they hadn't started the war for a long time. Should he do something secretly? He really wanted to see royal sister as soon as possible. She was so outstanding that he couldn't feel at ease wherever she went. Only by looking at her could he feel a little more at ease. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. Gong Dai frowned slightly and began to think of ways to aggravate the conflict between them. He remained silent. Bai Chio was scared out of his wits. He held Gong Yimo with both hands and carefully used his face to feel Gong Yimo's breathing. He was relieved when he found that she was only unconscious. If she died because of this, he was afraid that he wouldn't feel good for the rest of his life. At this time, when Yun Tian also came. He was an uncle in his 50s. He had a face full of beard and looked very strong. Young master, this is the princess of Jiyu state. When Yun Tian stared with his bell-sized eyes and said in disbelief, she looks like a delicate little girl. Is she really as powerful as you said? Also, what was that sound just now? Where is the general? Bai Chio didn't know how to answer. At this time, a monkey pulled his clothes. Bai Chio lowered his head and saw that the monkey was pointing in a direction. Bai Chio was happy and quickly said, Uncle Wen, my father is there. Quickly go and save him. When Yun Tian heard this, he quickly followed the monkey. Another elegant man in his 40s with a white face and no beard came and said to Bai Chio, Come, give her to Uncle Chang. You are also injured. Have a good rest. In fact, he knew that Bai Chio hated women since he was young, not to mention hugging them. So he was afraid that Bai Chio would feel uncomfortable and quickly came over to take her. Who knew that Bai Chio would avoid it and his handsome face was slightly red. It's okay. I will carry her. How could he be willing to let other men carry Gong Yimo? But there was no woman here. Chang Zaid was stunned. He saw that Bai Chio had already carried Gong Yimo without any reluctance. He touched his chin and suddenly sighed. It seemed that the young master was also enlightened. But with General Bai's identity, it would be difficult to carry the princess. Also, The young master usually didn't care about those women. It turned out that he hadn't met the right person. Look at him being so careful. It was the first time in his life. Chapter 447. They couldn't go back to the Longcheng camp because the tiger tally was in Liu Jin's hands. If they went back, Liu Jin would turn the tables on them. The few thousand of them were nothing. So they found a place to camp and discussed what to do next. Gong Yimo was the only woman here. She lived alone in a tent. Bai Ji also asked the military doctor to check on her. He said that she was in a coma because of poison. It seemed that she hadn't eaten for a long time. She was very weak. There were no fatal injuries. She might wake up in a few days. Bai Chio twisted the handkerchief with water and gently wiped Gong Yimo's face. His movements were so careful, as if he was afraid of hurting her. He couldn't imagine that a woman like her, in front of tens of thousands of people, would be able to tell them to leave without batting an eyelid. He didn't know how she managed to escape, but when he saw her fainted under the tree, he knew that it wouldn't have been easy. Later on, when there were pursuers, she still told him to leave first to get help. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was so useless. He called himself a man in vain. His father had told him when he was young that a man should have an indomitable spirit and should not run away in the face of battle. But tonight, he had violated both of those commandments. He was ashamed. He remembered clearly in his mind that when she used her inner strength to push him away, her red sleeves fluttering in the wind. The sleeves were stained with blood. It should represent evil. But in his eyes, it was more holy than the white veil. It was more seductive. Bai Chio's hand tightened. He couldn't remove the handkerchief on Gong Yimo's face. He didn't dare to look at that face again. When he looked at that face, he couldn't move his eyes away. He wanted to sink into it, so he could only look at her waist that was wrapped hastily. Because of her last counterattack, her waist was once again badly mutilated. Bai Chio suddenly felt heartache. How could he feel heartache for a woman? He didn't dare to think about it anymore. He quickly shook his head. He used a pair of scissors to cut the cloth on her waist and then carefully untied it. Sure enough, blood was still flowing. It was bright red, and it was a sharp contrast with her snow-white skin. Bai Chio's eyebrows jumped. He suddenly felt that it was a mistake to bandage her because it tested his willpower too much. But now, he was even more unwilling to let others bandage Gong Yimo. So he chanted the clear heart mantra in his heart while bandaging her. When he was done, his serious face was covered with sweat. It was as if he had just fought a tough battle. He was ready to leave after bandaging her, but Gong Yimo suddenly mumbled and then grabbed his hand. Bai Chio's heart was not pure to begin with. With her taking the initiative, he only felt that the hand she was holding was burning. But when he wanted to pull his hand away, he couldn't. Only he knew how much strength a person in a coma had. This kitten-like voice caused Bai Chio's serious expression to crack. His face turned red again. Even he didn't know what he was embarrassed about. He must leave. If he stayed any longer, he would feel weird. But this time, Gong Yimo really used some strength. She pulled him. "Don't go. I'm in pain." She felt wronged. Even in her sleep, she pursed her lips as if she was going to cry. Bai Chio's heart softened. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But he still sat back. "You only feel pain now? What were you doing earlier? Weren't you very fierce and domineering? You even said that you wanted to show me what it means to be a woman who is not inferior to a man." Bai Chio suddenly pursed his lips and smiled. How could those women who were not inferior to a man be compared to her? Thinking of this, he was suddenly shocked. He didn't understand why his feelings had changed. Why did he suddenly feel that he didn't hate women? The next day, Gong Yimo woke up. She saw Bai Chio beside her bed. She was shocked. "You're awake." His voice was a little hoarse. His eyes were red. The bandage on the wound on his face was removed. The wound was beginning to scab. Gong Yimo looked at him puzzledly. "You watched over me for the whole night?" She was really flattered. Didn't this guy see women as poisonous? But when she thought of how she was injured because of their Bai family, she felt at ease. Bai Chio didn't answer her question. Seeing that Gong Yimo still couldn't move, he went out to get water for her to wash up. When she was washing up, Bai Chio went to bring breakfast. He was so considerate. Gong Yimo was stunned. Did this guy really become a slave? Gong Yimo was puzzled. She drank some porridge and lay down again. After a while, 2 people came in. Wen Yutian and Chang Zaid were a little embarrassed. After all, Gong Yimo was a beautiful girl. She was still recovering. It was not appropriate for them to come in, but the situation was critical now. They couldn't care less. They bowed and introduced themselves. Then, the 2 of them went straight to the point. Now that Longcheng camp is controlled by Liu Jin, we have discussed a few countermeasures. Please help us. Gong Yimo nodded. She knew that the 2 of them were just trying to find a doctor in a desperate situation. After all, they didn't have many people now. Bai Ji was still unconscious. They felt helpless. And she had the highest status here. Naturally, they had to give her some face. But Gong Yimo didn't agree with their plan. Because the chance of winning was too small. Bai Ji was unconscious. They couldn't even find out the whereabouts of the other half of the tiger tally, let alone fight back. Then what is your opinion, princess? Chang Zaid humbly asked for advice. His attitude was very sincere. Gong Yimo thought for a while. Let's wait for 2 days. If Liu Jin comes in these 2 days, we will hide. First, I need to rest and recover. Second, we will see if General Bai can wake up, Gong Yimo said and coughed a few times. Her body was indeed very weak. If General Bai can't wake up, I will borrow soldiers when I get better. Borrow soldiers? Wen Tiantian glared. He looked very fierce. His voice was also very loud. When he spoke, it was like a large bell. At this border, other than our Longcheng camp, who else has soldiers? Even if there were, those people were just ants trying to shake a tree. Gong Yimo laughed softly. Her face was pale. But when she spoke, she had a calm and confident demeanor. You also said that this is the border. Longcheng camp is the garrison of Dai State. Further north, isn't there Yu Chi's garrison? You. When Tiantian didn't know what to say. Bai Chio and Chang Zaid were also shocked. They felt that her words were no less than a fairy tale. Borrow soldiers from Yu Chi? Gong Yimo seemed to have a well-thought-out plan. She comforted them. Where there is a will, there is a way. Since I dared to say this to Yu Chi, they naturally have some confidence in me. Other than that, do you have any better ideas? Chapter 448. An even better idea. Chang Zaid and the rest looked at each other. They really didn't have a better idea. But was it possible to borrow soldiers from Yu Chi? Now that the civil war in Yu Chi was about to break out, neither the Empress Dowager nor the young emperor dared to act rashly. What if the other party misunderstood and started fighting? Well, this wasn't a problem that the people of Dai State needed to think about. Chang Zaid finally sighed. He should go and take care of the general. Maybe he would wake up after feeding him more ginseng soup. 3 days later, Gong Yimo's injuries were slightly better, but Liu Jin and the rest didn't give up. They tried to find Gong Yimo a few times, but they were evaded by the wetlands and forests. Liu Jin was getting more and more anxious. Although Bai Ji looked better, he didn't show any signs of waking up. Gong Yimo made a prompt decision to bring Bai Ji to Yu Chi. First, to seek medical treatment. Second, to borrow soldiers. No matter what, it was the only way. In the end, they sat in a makeshift carriage. Gong Yimo and Bai Ji, the 2 patients, sat in the carriage while Bai Chio and Chang Zaid took turns to drive the carriage. They really went to Yu Chi. With Yu Chi's invitation, Gong Yimo entered Yu Chi easily. Even Chang Zaid was surprised. He didn't expect that he would be able to enter Yu Chi so openly in his lifetime. Yu Chi was now under martial law. Entry and exit were strictly prohibited. Now, only the shops that the Prince of Qi had set up in Yu Chi could still operate. The other people had been chased away long ago. After passing through the checkpoint, Gong Yimo continued to walk and finally stopped at the border town, Moon City. Chang Zaid couldn't figure out Gong Yimo's thoughts and said, "Princess, The border forces are now divided into two groups. One is controlled by Empress Dowager Yu Qi, and the other is controlled by the little emperor. You're acting so rashly. Where do you want to borrow troops? Gong Yimo shook her head. It's not appropriate to borrow soldiers from either side. If I borrow from the emperor, he will be worried that the Empress Dowager's men will take advantage of the situation. If I borrow from the Empress Dowager, she will think the same. Bai Chio was expressionless. Then why did you say that you wanted to borrow soldiers? Gong Yimo seemed to see that the two men were very depressed. She stroked Little Monkey and smiled. Don't you know how to be flexible? We can borrow from both sides. Chang Zaid couldn't help but ask. But you're a guest invited by Emperor Yu Qi. The clearance document just now was Emperor Yu Qi's jade seal, and they had cleared it at the Emperor's border camp. How could the Empress Dowager lend troops to someone who was helping her opponent? Gong Yimo giggled. Where there's a will, there's a way. I've said it from the beginning. How would we know if we don't try? Although she said that, she already had a plan in mind. They found a place to stay in Moon City. Then, Gong Yimo sent a letter to the Emperor of Yu Qi, asking him to meet her. Yes, she wanted him to come and see her. Since he had a favor to ask of her, how could he not appear? These few days, Bai Chio and the rest were very anxious. Perhaps Gong Yimo was very anxious, but she still looked calm and composed, as if she had a card up her sleeve. On the third day, Gong Yimo finally met the person who wanted to meet her. Unexpectedly, the person who came first was not Sai Wuyan, but Empress Dowager Yu Qi. Gong Yimo was invited to a private room. When the curtain was lifted, she was surprised to see a graceful and luxurious woman. She was much younger than when they met in her previous life. She was dressed very delicately from head to toe. Now, she was only in her 30s. She took good care of herself and had power and influence. That kind of nobility was far from what an ordinary lady could have. It was a kind of natural dignity. Seeing this legendary woman, Gong Yimo was surprised but quickly calmed down. In her previous life, she and Empress Dowager Yu Qi had fought several times and could be considered to have a mutual understanding of each other. Gong Yimo admired a woman who was able to hold power step by step during the feudal era. It was just that this Empress Dowager had some wisdom and courage. She just lacked a little benevolence and the ability to rule a country. Otherwise, the civil strife in her previous life would not have lasted for 10 years until she fought her way in. And now that she was here, it proved that in Yu Qi, her power was still stronger than the emperor. Gong Yimo gave a junior's greeting. Empress Dowager Yu Qi, Dong Luani, was also sizing up Gong Yimo. The clothes she wore were East Continent snow brocade. Every inch of the brocade was gold. The brocade was gorgeous and under the sun, it shone like pearls. It was beautiful beyond words. On the other hand, the young lady was dressed very elegantly. But the blue sky after rain was very pleasing to the eye. She took a closer look and found that it was made from the cloud sky brocade that Yuheng could only get once a year. It was low-key and luxurious. She wore a full set of jewelry on her head. It was made from Nanhai Jin's 100-year-old Eastern pearls. The brilliance was restrained and each pearl was worth 1,000 gold. But the young lady opposite her only wore a hairpin, but that hairpin was a gorgeous blue color. It was extraordinary. With one look, she could tell that it was Jinxiu Master's Jian jadeite craftsmanship that was not passed on to outsiders. It was priceless. With one look, she knew what to do. She had a basic understanding of this young lady who seemed to be low-key and simple, but was actually filled with glory and splendor. Not to mention that calm temperament, it was a style that she had never seen before. She thought that there was no woman in the world who could stand shoulder to shoulder with her. But after seeing this young lady who was rumored to have amazing skills, she could not find a trace of inferiority. So she sighed and said, "Princess is too courteous." Princess came from afar. Ijia came to see you and wanted to do the honors of a host. Gong Yimo did not mention at all why she sent a letter to Sai Wuyan, but the one who came was her. After saluting, she sat beside the Empress Dowager and sat at the same level as her. Her dignified manner was not inferior to that of the Empress Dowager. Dong Luani could not help but raise her spirits and said softly, "I wonder what princess came to Yuchi for?" Gong Yimo smiled, revealing her white teeth. One does not visit a temple without a cause. I came to ask Yuchi for a favor. Dong Luani expressed her disbelief. Wasn't it Sai Wuyen, that brat, who specially invited her to help? How did it become that she had a favor to ask of Yuchi? Gong Yimo saw that Dong Luani was confused, so she frankly told her what happened at the Longcheng barracks. Then she sighed. It's embarrassing to say that this is a family matter. But as the saying goes, distant water cannot put out a nearby fire. So, I want to borrow troops from Yuchi. Dong Luani thought it was funny. Her hibiscus face showed a timely expression of surprise. Princess, aren't you afraid that it's easy to borrow troops, but in the end, you're inviting a wolf into the house? Dong Luani did not know if this lass was really stupid or pretending to be stupid. She was honest about the chaotic situation at the borders of Daiyu State. If she borrowed troops from Yuchi, wouldn't it be easy for Yuchi to directly invade Daiyu State? Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo shook her head. How could it be inviting a wolf into the house? It's just like if I asked you to borrow troops, you should not refuse. Oh! Dong Luani suppressed her sarcasm and blinked. Ijia wants to hear Princess's opinion. Chapter 449. Gong Yimo pretended not to hear the mockery and continued, Empress Dowager, think about it. If you don't help us at this critical juncture, what will happen to our Daiyu State's enemies when you fight with the little emperor in the future? Dong Luani only smiled and didn't reply. If they wanted to go against her, they had to have the ability to do so. As if understanding her thoughts, Gong Yimo pretended to be surprised and said, You're so calm. Are you prepared? She raised her eyebrows and said with a wicked smile, Let me guess. Recently, I brought Bai Ji to visit all the famous doctors in Moon City, but they were all helpless. I've never heard of such a brilliant poison. I've never heard of Daiyu State, but I know a thing or two about Yuchi. For example, if we're talking about using poison, who in this world can compare to you? Empress Dowager? Only then did Dong Luani say contemptuously, There's no proof. What does Bai Ji's matter have to do with me? Princess, don't slander me. Gong Yimo lowered her head and chuckled. I'm just guessing. I'm guessing that someone in Yuchi helped Liu Jin with the condition that when Yuchi has internal strife in the future, Liu Jin has to send troops to repay the favor. Isn't that normal? Seeing Dong Luani's slightly cold expression, Gong Yimo continued, I'm ashamed to say this. I originally wanted to ask the Emperor of Yuchi for help. After all, he's a disciple of you, so a mere poison shouldn't be a problem. It's just that I met you first, Empress Dowager, so I thought of asking you for help directly. I didn't mean to suspect anything, so don't misunderstand. Dong Luani secretly gritted her teeth. She felt that Gong Yimo was really smart. She could suspect her just by looking at the source of the poison. How troublesome. If she didn't act according to her wishes and detoxify the poison, she would definitely look for Sai Wuyen. And with Sai Wuyen's talent and intelligence, it wouldn't be difficult for him to detoxify the poison. After thinking it through, she said softly, Although I don't know the cause of Bai Ji's poison, it will be easy for me to detoxify it. I just don't know how Princess will repay me. Gong Yimo said obediently, The only way to repay me is that when Daiyu State has internal strife, Dragon City Camp will not interfere. Dong Luani's expression and hesitation. Originally, if Gong Yimo didn't come, she could get Liu Jin's help during Yuchi's internal strife. But now that she was here, not only save Bai Ji, she even lose Dragon City Camp's help. How could she be willing now? Gong Yimo faintly said, The Empress Dowager is wise. She should understand that when Yuchi is in internal strife, the best solution is to not intervene. Seeing that Dong Luani was still hesitant and unhappy, Gong Yimo smiled and said, It's fine if you agree, but if you refuse, I'll go and ask Sai Wuyen. I'm afraid that when the time comes, not only will the Dragon City Camp not be involved, but they might even help your enemy. Dong Luani's sharp eyes suddenly stared at Gong Yimo, but Gong Yimo didn't feel guilty at all. They looked at each other, and the air between them seemed to freeze. After a while, the Empress covered her face with a feather fan and said softly, Princess from Daiyu State, has anyone ever told you that you are arrogant? She was threatening her in such a blatant manner, And in her own territory. Did she really think she didn't dare to kill? Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows, as if she didn't feel the tense atmosphere. Arrogant. I'm just a little bold. It's like I'm not only asking you for medicine, but also to borrow soldiers from you. If I'm arrogant, what should I do in the future? Gong Yimo pretended to be distressed. Dong Luani waved her feather fan. She looked delicate and noble, but she was angry. Gong Yimo heard the sound of a sword being unsheathed from behind the screen. She sneered. As far as I know, you haven't recovered from your serious injuries. What if the princess of Dai Yu State dies here? Dong Luani began to think about this possibility. Once Gong Yimo died, no one would meddle in her business, and the Dragon City Battalion would still be under her control. 50,000 people would be a great help. Originally, she wanted to cooperate with Bai Ji, but Bai Ji was stubborn. No matter how much she offered, he wouldn't betray the emperor of Dai Yu State. Therefore, if Bai Ji couldn't wake up, Gong Yimo couldn't live either. Gong Yimo thought that this was the beauty of a snake and scorpion. She was ready to kill her, but there was no murderous intent in her tone. It was as if she was just asking. She shook her head and sneered. I don't think this is a good idea. If I die here, Yuchi will be in danger. She directly threatened Dong Luani. She was telling her that if she dared to hurt her, the entire Yuchi would be finished. Her fearlessness made Dong Luani hesitate. As the Empress Dowager of a country, she had many eyes and ears. Naturally, she knew that Gong Yimo was sent here because she didn't get along with the Emperor of Dai Yu State. Therefore, she looked down on Gong Yimo. Who didn't know that Yuchi was about to go to war? She was sent here at this time. Even if she had some ability, wouldn't it be more dangerous? However, when she heard Gong Yimo's tough words, she hesitated. Perhaps Gong Yimo's attitude was too calm, or perhaps she was too arrogant. She definitely had some ability. Gong Yimo threw out the last sentence. Don't forget, I have something that father is very interested in. If I die here, do you think father will fly into a rage out of humiliation? Her words completely made Dong Luani give up the idea of taking the risk. She gritted her teeth unwillingly. Seeing the cooked duck fly away just like that, she felt very depressed. Dong Luani lay back and someone immediately rubbed her forehead. She closed her eyes, as if she didn't want to look at Gong Yimo again. You child, really, it's hard to like you. Dong Luani sighed faintly. Feeling the atmosphere in the room suddenly relax, Gong Yimo rubbed her nose and smiled apologetically without speaking. Forget it. Seeming to have made up her mind, Dong Luani said charmingly, I can save people, but I can't borrow soldiers. You also know that Ijia's Fengyi camp and the Emperor's Wei He camp have always been competitors. What if I lend Fengyi's people to you, but Wei his people take advantage of the situation and invade the camp? Moreover, after Bai Ji wakes up, what if he secretly helps Sai Wuyan in order to take revenge on Ijia? Are you going to help Ijia resolve these matters? Of course. Dong Luani frankly admitted to poisoning, so Gong Yimo didn't hesitate. You don't have to worry about Bai Ji. After he wakes up, he won't look for you because he listens to me. Dong Luani didn't believe it. He only listens to the Emperor of Dai Yu State. This was also the reason why she gave up on Bai Ji in the beginning. It was because he was stubborn that she changed her target to Liu Jin. Gong Yimo reached out and turned the gold medal in her hand. Do you see it? As if Zhen is here in person, what I mean is father's intention. This time, Dong Luani suddenly sat up straight and stared at the gold medal. It really was the Emperor's personal gold medal. It was actually in Gong Yimo's hands. She rejoiced in her heart. Fortunately, she didn't make a move just now. This princess seemed to have the Emperor's heart. She couldn't be touched. Chapter 450. If that's the case, then swear that you will never use the Dragon City camp's troop. Dong Luani's voice became serious. Gong Yimo sighed. Originally, she had some thoughts about the Dragon City camp, but now she had no other choice. Saving people was more important. I, Gong Yimo, swear to the heavens that I will never use the Dragon City camp's troops. If I go against it, I will be destroyed by the heavens and earth. After swearing, she shrugged indifferently. How about this? Dong Luani stared at her suspiciously, but she still relaxed a little. She talked about borrowing troops again. This time, she was not going to let go. She wanted to see how Gong Yimo would deal with the Dragon City camp. Seeing her unyielding attitude, Gong Yimo suddenly sighed and stood up. Since you insist, then I can only give up. Seeing Gong Yimo give up so quickly, Dong Luani, who had been vigilant, was at a loss. At first, Gong Yimo's attitude was so unyielding. She wanted to borrow troops and said that she had to do it. Why did she suddenly change? Dong Luani could not figure it out. Gong Yimo had already said goodbye. According to the agreement, Dong Luani gave her the antidote. Gong Yimo took it respectfully and really left. Dong Luani was a little depressed. But thinking that Sai Wuyen would not lend her troops, she felt a lot better. When Gong Yimo left, a man came out from behind Dong Luani. He took over the maid's job and massaged Dong Luani's forehead. Seeing Dong Luani's confused expression, he knew that she did not understand. The very handsome man smiled and said, "Actually, it's not difficult. This Dai Yu State's princess is just creating a diversion." "What do you mean?" Dong Luani asked. The man smiled. "Your Majesty, think about it. You love me so much that you can't bear to kill me. Then I want two things from you. One is power and the other is wealth. Which will you give me?" Dong Luani finally understood. She had been tricked. That girl kept saying that she wanted to borrow soldiers and even told the people around her in front of everyone that she wanted to borrow soldiers from both sides. Naturally, her thoughts were led astray and she thought that she really came to borrow soldiers. Unexpectedly, it was actually for Bai Ji's antidote. It made sense. If they really borrowed troops, the Dai Yu state would suffer heavy losses once the war started. Even if they won in the end, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Furthermore, he had used Yu Chi's soldiers to fight against the Dai Yu state soldiers. Those who survived would definitely not be willing to be under Bai Ji's command. She really thought that Gong Yimo wanted to borrow troops from both sides. When she thought about it this way, she really felt that it was feasible. She was just waiting to see what additional conditions Gong Yimo would come up with. She did not expect that it was just a feint. "I was actually tricked by a little girl. She's really scheming. She even tricked the people around her," Dong Luani sneered. "So what if Bai Ji wakes up? It's still an internal strife. She might as well have really come to me to borrow soldiers." The man shook his head. "Empress Dowager, you're wrong. Bai Ji is the spiritual leader of the Longcheng camp. Once he appears, many people will change sides. Moreover, Bai Ji still has half of the tiger tally. Once he wakes up, Liu Jin will definitely die." Dong Luani gritted her teeth. She did not expect that after so much careful planning, not only did she not reap any benefits, she was even tricked by Gong Yimo. However, it was not so easy to take advantage of her. Just wait, Gong Yimo will cry. After thinking about the proper business, Dong Luani groaned softly and felt a headache. The man quickly stopped talking and directly acted. In an instant, the room was filled with a spring scenery. Everyone else retreated. After Gong Yimo came out with the bottle, she heaved a sigh of relief. The most important thing now was to wake Bai Ji up. She was only thinking about borrowing troops. There was an easier way to solve the problem, so who would want to look for trouble? But after she got the antidote, she did not use it immediately. Instead, she wanted to do an experiment. Unfortunately, Gong Yimo let some animals drink Bai Ji's blood and there were no signs of poisoning. As a result, she really could not tell if the antidote was in her hands or not. Seeing this, Chang Zaid quickly said, "Why don't you let me test the poison? Animals can't, but humans can definitely." Gong Yimo shook her head. "Let's wait a little longer." She waited for another day. As expected, someone came to look for her again. Sai Wuyen. It had been 4 years since she last saw him. Who knew what kind of temperament he had now? Gong Yimo was a little uncertain. Until the moment the door was pushed open, she suddenly understood. Sai Wuyen was wearing the most dazzling red. That red seemed to be glowing with pearls. The sun shone through the window and onto his body. Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes. She only felt that the red was dazzling to the eyes. Now, the 24-year-old Sai Wuyan was at the prime of a man's life. His fair and delicate chin was lowered. When his amorous peach blossom eyes glanced over, that moment of breathtaking would make people hold their breaths, afraid to disturb this beauty. Seeing that Gong Yimo was slightly stunned, his thin red lips that looked as if they were stained with blood curled up slightly. He said with ill intentions, "Do you like this face very much?" Chem. Gong Yimo came back to her senses. He touched his face with his fingers. "If you like it, Jin will give you a chance to see it every day." He smiled, revealing his white teeth. It was devilish and unrestrained, making Gong Yimo's body tremble. She did not dare to look anymore. This guy was a pervert. It was better not to provoke him. "I don't have time to banter with you. I came today because I have a request." "Oh." Sai Wuyan's jade finger lightly tapped his lower lip. "Is it because of Bai Ji's matter? Didn't you already get the antidote from Imperial Mother?" Gong Yimo said gloomily, "It's better for me to keep an eye on your family members." As she spoke, she handed over half a bottle of antidote. This antidote was in liquid form and was stored in a jade bottle. Sai Wuyan knew at a glance that there was only half a bottle. He did not expose her and only opened it to take a sniff. Then he said, "It's the antidote, but it's missing one ingredient. If you drink it directly, you'll definitely die." Gong Yimo's back straightened. She was worried that Dong Luani was up to no good. After all, once Bai Ji died, it would be very troublesome to deal with Liu Jin. This way, she would not have the energy to interfere with Yu Qi's matter. It was killing two birds with one stone. But at that time, she had concealed her thoughts very well. Perhaps Dong Luani was afraid that she would borrow soldiers and gave her the real antidote. On the other side, Sai Wuyan had already taken out a red pill and threw it into the jade bottle. The pill disappeared the moment it entered the liquid. Sai Wuyan handed the bottle to Gong Yimo, indicating that it was done. Gong Yimo was a little conflicted. She hated dealing with people who were unpredictable the most. Because she did not know when they would plot against her. This was great. She had 2 bottles of antidote in her hands. But which one was the real one? Dong Luani and Sai Wuyan, neither of them could be trusted. What a headache. Chapter 451. When Sai Wuyan saw that she was hesitating, she gloated. "Mother, this poison is called enrich. The poison is stored in the brain, so it will be difficult for you to find someone to test it on because the blood of the poisoned person is normal. Unless, you can break open the poisoned person's brain." Gong Yimo glared at him, and he laughed even more happily. "Do you want me to give you a dose of enrich as well, so you can test it?" "No need." Gong Yimo put the jade bottle in her pocket, but in reality, she put it in her space. As for who she should use the antidote for, she would think about it later. Sai Wuyan was very satisfied with her actions. "You appeared in Yuchi with my document. Can I understand that you are here to help me?" Sai Wuyan asked with a smile. His smile was very evil, and he definitely didn't look like a good person. Gong Yimo sighed. "I am just a weak woman, and I have not recovered from my injuries. I'm afraid I can't help much." "Then why did you come to Yuchi?" Sai Wuyan was a little dissatisfied. Seeing her refuse, his anger was written all over his face. Gong Yimo touched her nose. "I am here to observe." "Oh." "To be honest, whether it is the Empress Dowager or His Majesty, I don't have much interaction with them. But I will help whoever is stronger to end the war faster. So before that, I want to observe." Gong Yimo said frankly. These were her true thoughts, and there was nothing false about them. After all, she wanted to end the civil strife as soon as possible. "You are quite honest." Sai Wuyan narrowed his eyes and smiled. He personally poured tea for Gong Yimo. His white jade-like fingertips contrasted with the dark green jade bowl. There was an indescribable beauty. She appreciated beautiful things, but she couldn't give up her principles for beauty, so she didn't drink the tea. Seeing that she didn't move, Sai Wuyan threatened, "You are so disrespectful. Aren't you afraid that the 2 antidotes are fake?" Gong Yimo shook her head. "I still believe you. After all, the civil war in Longcheng camp is not good for you. That's hard to say. Sai Wuyan smiled cruelly. After all, Yuqi is currently in an abyss of suffering. In order to prevent others from taking advantage of the situation, it's best to create chaos as well. Gong Yimo froze. Sai Wuyan's threat was really reasonable. She gritted her teeth and drank the tea. Through the faint fragrance of the incense, Sai Wuyan didn't say anything and focused on brewing the tea. He really gave off a noble and cold feeling. However, although she sympathized with his past, she couldn't help him because of that. Unexpectedly, Sai Wuyan glanced at her and stared at her empty teacup as he spoke with dissatisfaction. A cow chewing on peonies. How precious was this tea? It was only 2 taels a year. Gong Yimo smiled awkwardly. I don't really like tea. Why don't we drink? Sai Wuyan didn't even have the strength to glare at her. Sometimes, she was so slippery that people couldn't do anything about it. If soft methods didn't work, then they could only use hard methods. Gong Yimo couldn't sit still. She had drunk the tea, seen the person, and made her position clear. She still had to rush back to save people. Sai Wuyan saw that the cushion under her seemed to have grown thorns. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. Tell me, if Jin didn't want you to watch and wanted you to be on Jin's side from the start, what should Jin do? Gong Yimo smiled. You think too highly of me. I'm just a little woman. I can't withstand the storm. Little woman? Sai Wuyan slowly savored this word. A little woman can force Yuheng Emperor to death and let Kim Yoon ascend the throne? A little woman can solve Lu Yi's winter food and population migration crisis in one fell swoop? Imperial Mother is too conceited. Although she is a woman and has sat in this position, she still looks down on women. Otherwise, she wouldn't have treated you like that a few days ago. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows. She realized that Sai Wuyan's ability couldn't be underestimated. He knew everything. Perhaps, he really did have a better chance of winning. Sai Wuyan confessed, in terms of military strength, Imperial Mother is still better. The reason Jin knows so much is because someone helped. Gong Yimo's heated heart calmed down again. At that time, she had pointed out a path for Sai Wuyan and instigated him to oppose the Empress Dowager because she didn't want the 10 years of internal strife. But now, the situation was different. The problem hadn't been solved in 4 years. It made her question Sai Wuyan's ability. If he couldn't help, she would rather help the Empress Dowager. Don't you want to know who told Jin? Seeing that Gong Yimo was thinking about the problem, Sai Wuyan wasn't anxious at all. Not only that, Jin also accidentally found out a big secret about Dai Yu State's imperial family. Gong Yimo's thoughts were pulled back. What do you mean? Dai Yu State's secret? After thinking about it, it seemed that there was only one thing, her background. The Shui clan? Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows slightly. The Shui clan helped you? Seeing that Gong Yimo was surprised, Sai Wuyan nodded. Yes, the Shui clan is very kind. When Jin needed help, they helped Jin without any compensation. Gong Yimo touched the fake stone on her body. For a moment, she didn't know what these people wanted to do. Sai Wuyan said, say, if Gong Dai was poisoned by Jin, would you be obedient? Hearing this, Gong Yimo's face sank, and a strong murderous aura exploded from her body. She no longer acted as if this matter had nothing to do with her. Instead, she really wanted to kill. Persuade you not to play with fire? Also, you're not Gong Dai's opponent. Thinking of this, Gong Yimo's murderous aura calmed down a little. Unexpectedly, Sai Wuyan sneered again. Yes, Jin is not Gong Dai's opponent. But what if the Shui clan attacked? While telling Gong Dai the secret that would drive him crazy, they could take the opportunity to poison him. It doesn't seem that difficult. Bang! The entire red sandalwood tea table was overturned. Gong Yimo grabbed Sai Wuyan's collar and pressed him against the wall. Her eyes were full of murderous aura. You want to use Gong Dai to control me? Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes. Then how about I kill you first? As soon as she moved, many people appeared in the room. Their auras were calm, and their blades were unsheathed. Let go of His Majesty. Those people surrounded Gong Yimo and shouted sternly, otherwise, don't even think about leaving alive. Gong Yimo looked around, but did not let go. Sai Wuyan was threatened at close range by Gong Yimo, but his expression remained calm. His nose was sharp, and he immediately smelled the scent of blood on Gong Yimo's body. Just now, he was afraid that her wound had split open again. Back down. He was caught by Gong Yimo, but he told his people to back down. But those people hesitated, afraid that Gong Yimo would accidentally hurt the emperor. Back down. It was best not to let him say it a third time. Those people had no choice but to back down with their blades. Finally, they all put away their blades. This kind of tacit understanding and fighting strength should be one of Cai Wuyan's trump cards, right? Chapter 452. Gong Yimo's fingers tightened. She really wanted to kill him, because she suddenly felt that the person in front of her was very dangerous. He should never, ever have had any ideas about Gong Dai. Why are you in such a rush? If you kill me, Gong Dai will die without a doubt. Cai Wuyan chuckled, as if he did not care about her threat. Gong Yimo sneered, isn't there still Empress Dowager Yu Qi? If I bring your head to see her, she will definitely be very happy to make me an antidote. Is it really an antidote? If you kill me, that old woman will succeed. Her ambition is no less than any man's. As long as she doesn't do anything and allows Gong Dai to die, the Dai Yu state will have one less threat. Will she help you? Cai Wuyan was unperturbed. Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes. The hand holding his collar suddenly moved down, her palm facing his chest. Her 5 fingers dug in slightly, as if she wanted to dig out his heart. Her lips curled into a gentle cold smile. You're hurting my heart too much. If I hadn't given you directions back then, you would still be in Dong Wani's bed right now. You're turning your back on me like this. It's really disappointing. Gong Yimo's words finally caused Cai Wuyan's expression to change. That was the thing he hated the most when others mentioned it, but now Gong Yimo had said it out loud. But Gong Yimo was like this. If she was angered, she would poke the other party where it hurt. Her revenge was very direct. The two of them looked at each other and saw a strong killing intent in each other's eyes. You'll only speed up Gong Dai's death. There's no use at all. Cai Wuyan was angry. He wanted to use Gong Dai to threaten her and provoke her. Gong Yimo's fingers dug in even deeper. Cai Wuyan gave a grunt, but he stubbornly refused to admit defeat. At worst, he would just die. Your Majesty. The people guarding on the side were all anxious. But the emperor did not speak, so they did not dare to act rashly. Why would the Snow Clan listen to you? This was what Gong Yimo couldn't figure out the most. It was also what she was most worried about. If the Snow Clan really told Gong Dai the secret of her identity, then Gong Dai would be caught off guard and the Snow Clan might really succeed. After all, the Snow Clan was her mother's family, so Gong Dai might not be so cautious. And that incident would really have a big impact on Gong Dai. Damn it. She had actually forgotten about the Snow Clan, whose intentions were unclear. Cai Wuyan took a few deep breaths before saying, what kind of cooperation and transactions we have with others is none of your business, right? Gong Yimo sneered. At this moment, her killing intent seemed to have materialized. If you dare to hurt Gong Dai, I won't care. Furthermore, I guarantee that you will die faster than him. Cai Wuyan endured the pain and glanced at her. Princess, if you want to save Gong Dai, it's not impossible, he sneered. As long as you help me, the antidote will be sent to Gong Dai regularly. Isn't that great? Gong Yimo shook her head. I believe that Gong Dai won't fall for your trick so easily, but you're hard to guard against. It's better to just kill you. Not fall for it. Cai Wuyan laughed. What if I tell him that you're poisoned? After all, in Gong Dai's eyes, you're so unguarded. In the past, he even dared to cut his own flesh and bleed so that you wouldn't be in danger, let alone taking poison. If you're so sure, then you wouldn't be afraid to kill me now. Seems like you're not afraid of death. Gong Yimo's tone was cold. Kill him. It's not like she had never killed an emperor before. Feeling Gong Yimo's strength, she really wanted to make her move. Cai Wuyan took a deep breath. He could feel that his chest was bleeding. He never thought that Gong Yimo actually dared to. He didn't dare to delay any longer and said loudly, even if you kill me, you won't be able to stop the Snow Clan. They have already reached Long City and Gong Dai is there. You won't make it in time. If you kill me, I will also bury Gong Dai with you. What do you want? Gong Yimo was still afraid. She didn't want Gong Dai to be in any danger, but meeting such a despicable person, she was really angry. She really wanted to kill him. What I want, it's very simple. I want you. Cai Wuyan finally didn't put on the airs of an emperor. Regardless of the fact that his chest was still bleeding, he laughed sinisterly. That old witch is very satisfied with my martial arts. Do you want to give it a try? Cai Wu-yang. Gong Yimo was really angry. This guy was simply challenging the limit of her patience. Cai Wuyan smiled particularly coquettishly. Or, if you eat the poison, I will ask the Snow Clan to stop. Gong Yimo hesitated. She felt that Gong Dai wouldn't be schemed against by the Snow Clan, but she was worried about this kind of thing. Who could say for sure? After all, regarding her life, Gong Dai, he really can't say for sure. She hesitated, the strength of her hand loosened a bit. Cai Wuyan panted a few times, looking at her struggling face, he encouraged her. I admit that Gong Dai is very difficult to deal with, but as long as it's related to you, he would rather kill the wrong person than let them go. A few days ago, I also sent the blood-red clothes you threw away to Long City. Do you think Gong Dai will recognize your clothes when he sees them? If the Snow Clan first tells him the secret of your life, then throw the blood-red clothes in front of him, and then poison the clothes, Gong Dai will be distracted. Can he escape? Don't be naive. Gong Dai is after all a human, not a god. Maybe it doesn't need to be so troublesome. The Snow Clan only needs to throw the blood-red clothes in front of him and tell him that if he wants you to live, he must take the poison. Do you think he will take it or not? Damn it. Gong Yimo suddenly loosened her hand, looking at Cai Wuyan clutching his chest and coughing. She finally gritted her teeth and said, If I take the poison you give me, will you let Gong Dai go? Cai Wuyan saw that Gong Yimo had calmed down and nodded. I can send the message in front of you. Gong Yimo stretched out her hand. Where is the medicine? Seeing that she is so obedient, Cai Wuyan suspiciously handed the medicine to her. He watched her play with the medicine in her palm for a moment, and then she threw it into her mouth. His heart instantly calmed down. He didn't know that Gong Yimo would throw the medicine directly into her space, so seeing that she obeyed, he breathed a sigh of relief. It's your turn to send the letter, Gong Yimo said. Guards. Cai Wuyan tidied himself up. Someone brought a carrier pigeon, so he was straightforward. He directly wrote a letter and then released the pigeon. They reached an agreement. Gong Yimo didn't want to fall out with her now. She wasn't sure if Gong Dai would be safe, so she endured. Since we are now in a cooperative relationship, the antidote you gave me before isn't a fake, right? Cai Wuyan glared at her. Don't worry, I know what's important. How can Bai Ji compare to you? My princess. After getting the confirmation, she didn't stay any longer and directly went to find Bai Ji. Cai Wuyan showed a pained expression and took the medicine. It was really difficult to tame this little wild cat, but his poison melted in his mouth, so he wasn't afraid of Gong Yimo at all. Gong Yimo, he wanted her. Chapter 453. After giving the antidote to Bai Chio, Gong Yimo quickly sent a letter to Gong Dai, telling him to be careful of the Snow Clan. Their position was unclear, so he had to be careful, but he didn't know if he could make it in time. After all, the Snow Clan was already in Long City. On Gong Ju's side, he received some news that there seemed to be unrest at the border. Calculating the time, Gong Ju realized that the riot in Longcheng Barracks happened to coincide with Sister Gong's arrival. She wouldn't be involved, right? No. With Royal Sister's temperament, she couldn't be involved in it, could she? Thinking of this, Gong Ju's heart was burning with anxiety. He secretly sent Yu Qi's people to check carefully. He must get news of Sister Gong. As for himself, he made up his mind to go to Yu Qi as soon as he finished his work. Just when he was feeling annoyed, Lo Qi came to report that someone wanted to see him. Who is it? Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. He walked into the room and saw two old people. And they are acquaintances. Gong Dai didn't say anything. He didn't know why the Snow Clan wanted to see him. Xue Qi, the old lady, claimed that she was Royal Sister's grandmother. That was why Gong Dai treated her so gently. I wonder why the two of you came from so far away. Shouldn't they be in Luyi? Xue Qi coughed a few times, while Xue Zhon took out something and presented it to Luo Qi. Luo Qi, who was next to Xue Qi, took a step forward and opened it. He discovered that it was a bloody robe. Gong Dai was very familiar with this dress. It was the dress that the royal sister designed herself. Gong Dai's expression didn't change, but his heart was in turmoil. He didn't touch the dress, but he was very sure that it belonged to the royal sister. Royal sister was really injured. Gong Ju's heart tightened. For a moment, he couldn't figure out why his people in Yu Qi hadn't received the news yet, but the Xue family had already received it. This was a conspiracy. As long as he thought about it, he knew that Sister Gong had fallen into their trap. How disobedient. Why didn't she protect herself? Gong Dai suppressed his worries. At the same time, he made up his mind to leave for Yu Qi immediately. Seeing the frown on Zhong Xian's face, the old man who was following the granny, Xue Zhon, said, "This is from our clansmen in Jade Qi. They said that the saintess was injured at the border. However, our abilities are limited. I hope that King Qi will lend us a hand." Saying this, Xue Zhon knelt down. His words were sincere, as if he was really worried about Gong Yimo. How did the royal sister become their saintess? Gong Dai calmed down a little and realized that this matter was very strange. The Snow clan knew about the royal sister's whereabouts before he did. This was very suspicious. The only explanation was that the Snow clan was involved in the matter of the royal sister's injury. That's why they were one step ahead of him. After figuring this out, Gong Dai suddenly became vigilant. However, he didn't show it on his face. "I will take care of this matter. Is there anything else?" Gong Dai said as he moved his finger. Lo Qi understood that the king wanted to arrest them, but aren't they the princess's family? Luo Qi thought strangely as he prepared in secret. The Snow clan's people didn't know that they were exposed so quickly. Xue Qi coughed and Xue Zhon spoke again. "I heard that. You like our saintess." When Xue Zhon said this, he seemed to be in a difficult position. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and stared at him dangerously. Now that Gong Yimo wasn't by his side, he couldn't protect her. Therefore, he didn't want anyone to spread this matter. He didn't want anyone to hurt her. However, he couldn't stop them in time. Just as he was about to stop Xue Zhon from talking and capture them for interrogation, Xue Zhon said something that shocked him. "Since it's like this, I should tell you the secret of our saintess." Gong Dai suppressed all his thoughts and looked at the two Snow Clan's people. Could it be that the royal sister had a secret that he didn't know about? Thinking about this, he suddenly felt nervous. It seemed that what Xue Zhon was about to say was very important to him. Maybe Xue Zhon was lying, but this matter was related to Gong Yimo. Gong Dai suppressed his anxiety and said in a low voice, "Oh, royal sister's secret? Isn't she the princess of our Daiyu state? Apart from that, what other secret does she have?" Xue Zhon looked around. "Please ask your attendants to leave." Gong Dai raised his brows slightly. He was on high alert against the Snow clan. However, because he was strong, he wasn't afraid that the Snow clan would do anything. Therefore, he asked Lo Qi and the others to leave. Xue Zhon looked at Xue Qi and said in a low voice, "King Qi, do you know the saintess's mother, Xue Lian?" Gong Dai frowned impatiently. At this moment, Xue Qi spoke. Her voice was low and hoarse. She looked old and weak. "Your Highness, Xue Lian, is the saintess of Snow Country." She opened her eyes and looked at Gong Dai. When Snow Country was destroyed, she was kidnapped by the monarch of Daiyu State. Gong Dai became more and more impatient. "I know all this." Xue Qi suddenly smiled strangely. "But, there is one thing that you don't know." Cough, cough. Gong Dai, who was sitting on the seat of honor, looked at the stooped old woman in front of him and listened to her speak. "When Xue Lian was taken away, she was pregnant with my son's child. She was already 1 month old. 1 month old, child." Gong Dai was stunned. It took him a while to understand what she was talking about. Xue Lian had a child who was 1 month old before she entered the palace. Gong Ju's eyes widened slightly. He could hear his heart thumping loudly in his chest. He didn't say anything for a long time. Calculating the time, it was Royal Sister's birthday and Xue Lian's arrival in the palace. If Xue Lian aborted the child and got pregnant again, Xue Lian shouldn't have been at this age. In other words, at that moment, Gong Ju suddenly felt a sense of timidity. His palms were wet, and he didn't dare to think about it. He was afraid that he couldn't control himself. Where's the proof? Gong Dai's gaze stunned Xue Qi, who had been through a lot. Words aren't proof. Where's the proof? Xue Qi tried to calm her heartbeat. Since the pressure coming from Gong Dai's body was too terrifying, she only found her voice after a long while. She trembled as she handed over a piece of jade to him. As long as it's a member of the Xue clan, her blood can seep into this piece of jade. Gong Dai took it subconsciously. But in the next second, he threw it on the ground. He threw the jade pendant on the ground, and his entire hand began to turn black. There was poison on it. Guards! Gong Dai shouted, and everyone surrounded the two of them. He quickly sealed his acupuncture points so that the poison wouldn't spread. Xue Qi widened her eyes in pity. This Gong Ju is too alert. In such a situation, he clearly lost his mind. But he threw away the jade just as he held it. If he had held it for a while longer, the poison would have reached his heart, and he would have been at their mercy. However, their plan couldn't keep up with the changes. Gong Dai discovered it in time, and the poison wasn't too deep. He would be able to detoxify it in a month. At this critical juncture, Xue Zhon suddenly spoke. Your Highness, you shouldn't act rashly. Otherwise, the princess will be in grave danger. Chapter 454. Lo Qi, who was about to charge forward and capture them, hesitated. Who didn't know that the princess was the prince's Achilles heel? As expected, when Gong Dai heard Xue Zhon's words, he glared at him fiercely. What did you do to Royal Sister? His expression was so gloomy that even an old man like Xue Zhon couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. However, he was still an expert of the Snow Clan, so he was able to withstand the pressure. We didn't do anything to the princess, but if the prince doesn't cooperate, the princess's poison will act up, and you can't blame us. Poison act up? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes. You will use the same method to harm Royal Sister? Xue Zhon sneered. Of course there are people who can force the princess to take the poison herself. So, does the prince still want to resist? Gong Dai caught the main point and laughed softly. His laughter made people's scalps numb. In the end, he raised his black jade-like eyes and stared at them. His expression didn't change at all. Suppress them. Gong Dai. At this moment, the old woman, Xue Qi, suddenly shouted. Don't tell me that you don't care about Gong Yimo's life or death. That's more like it. They obviously didn't have any relationship with her, but they kept calling her Saintess and Princess. Since the Snow Clan dared to do this, it meant that they didn't have any respect for the Royal Sister. It was normal for them to call her by her name. Gong Dai stood up. He was still holding his hand, and his lips were a little bruised. He looked at Xue Qi without any pity for the elderly or the weak. I just want to ask you one thing. Is what you said just now true? He was referring to the fact that the Royal Sister wasn't of the Dai Yu state's bloodline. Xue Qi smiled strangely. Does it matter whether it's true or not? Does it matter? Gong Dai sneered, but his heart was boiling with anger. It didn't matter, because no matter what, he was determined to marry Gong Yimo. However, this matter was very important to him. It was so important that he didn't dare to be careless. Drag them away. Gong Dai leisurely made a cut on his hand and let the poisonous blood flow out. His entire person seemed to be enshrouded in fog, and his expression was unfathomable. You don't want to talk, but you don't know that I have ways to make you talk. He muttered to himself in a low voice as the corners of his lips curled up slightly. The flickering cold light in his eyes was frightening. Don't forget, Gong Dai was born in Zhao prison. After the two of them were taken away, Lo Qi hurried forward and asked worriedly, Your Highness, are you all right? I'm fine. Gong Dai used his qi to force the poisonous blood out of his hand. Soon, his hand returned to its normal color, but he felt a little dizzy. Obviously, The poison was overbearing and could not be completely forced out. What happened? Gong Dai felt dizzy as he sat back down on the chair and said in a deep voice, "Summon Liu Ranxin." Liu Ranxin? That was a godly doctor, and he had a strange temperament. His Highness had done him a favor, and he had promised His Highness to help him 3 times, but now His Highness wanted to use him? Lo Qi realized that the situation was serious and hurriedly went to summon him. Gong Dai closed his eyes and couldn't help but think of the royal sister. The royal sister had the space, and if she had willingly taken the poison, then she definitely wasn't poisoned. That's why he wasn't threatened by these people. But he was still worried about her, very worried about her. He really, really wanted to immediately appear by her side. He wanted to see her safely in his arms. Then, his eyes couldn't help but be glued to the jade pendant on the ground. Was it possible? The royal sister was from the Xue clan, the child of the Xue imperial concubine and the king of the Xue clan? He clearly shouldn't think about it, but he couldn't control himself. As soon as he thought of that possibility, as soon as he thought that the royal sister had nothing to do with him, he felt like his blood was flowing in reverse, and he couldn't control himself. He really wanted to go to the royal sister's side, he really wanted to. After Liu Ranxin arrived, he saw Gong Dai's complexion and helped him to the bed. At this time, Gong Dai was still conscious, but his body was getting weaker and weaker, as if his body had fallen asleep. "Dr. Liu, how is our prince?" Lo Qi's face was stiff and solemn. Liu Ranxin frowned and finally said, "Fortunately, the prince was alert and didn't get poisoned too deeply. He also drained his blood in time to remove the poison, so this poison won't harm the prince's life, but what?" Lo Qi asked anxiously. "But there is still some residual poison in the prince's body. The medicine this old man prescribed can remove the poison, but it will take some time. During this time, the prince's martial arts will be temporarily disabled, and he will be weak all over. But after a month, the poison will be removed." More than a month? Lo Qi was a little confused. Now that the princess was in trouble, how could the prince wait until a month later to go to Yuqi? So he asked, "What if the princess is forced to move?" Liu Ranxin glared at him. "Although it's residual poison, you can't be careless. This old man also needs to observe at all times and administer acupuncture every day. It's best not to overwork yourself, in case the poison attacks the heart, which will be a little troublesome." As he spoke, he administered the acupuncture and prescribed the medicine. He told Gong Dai not to move too much and to rest well. Then he took the medicine box and left, saying that he would come back another day. Lo Qi saw that Gong Dai's eyes were closed and thought that he was resting. He didn't dare to disturb him, so he took the people outside. But was Gong Dai really resting? No, his whole heart was burning, boiling. He couldn't stop himself from thinking about what the Xue people had said just now. He was 80% sure that the Xue people weren't lying. They hated the Dai Yu state to the bone, but the royal sister was wholeheartedly loyal to the Dai Yu state. If the royal sister was really the princess of the Dai Yu state, the Xue people wouldn't have so much resentment towards her. It was very likely that the royal sister knew about her background, but refused to cooperate with them. She was still loyal to the Dai Yu state, so they flew into a rage out of humiliation, resulting in today's incident. The royal sister wasn't his royal sister, so there was no barrier between him and Momo. It was clearly the news he had dreamed of, but when it really happened, he was afraid. He was afraid that the news was fake. Gong Dai originally thought that he wouldn't be afraid anymore, but when it came to her, he was afraid of everything, afraid of everything. "Your Highness." Suddenly, Lo Qi happily walked in. "Your Highness, there's a letter from the princess." Gong Dai opened his eyes. Seeing that Gong Dai couldn't move, Lo Qi hurriedly said, "Your Highness, don't worry, I'll read it for you." Gong Dai finally calmed down and listened. To Gong Dai. "The Xue clan is cooperating with the emperor of the Yu Qi dynasty to use you to threaten me. Although Sai Wuyan has already ordered the Xue clan to cancel the operation, I'm worried that the Xue clan will continue to act willfully for other reasons. So you must not believe them. Your royal sister, I, am alive and kicking right now, very healthy. No one in the heavens or the earth is stronger than me. So when you receive the letter, tell me that you're safe. I'm worried about you. You're the number one tyrant sister in the world. Lochi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He never thought that in private, the princess would talk to the prince like this. What did she mean by number one tyrant sister in the world? The princess was really so cute. Chapter 455. After receiving the letter, Gong Dai was relieved. He knew that the royal sister would not be in trouble. He did not expect that he would be the one who fell into the trap. Gong Dai smiled bitterly. However, the royal sister said that no matter what the Snow Clan said, he must not believe it. Could it be that she already knew what the Snow Clan was going to say? Gong Dai's heart was burning again. If the royal sister guessed what they were going to say, wouldn't it prove that what they said was true? There was no blood relationship between them. Gong Yimo fed the antidote to Bai Ji in trepidation. That guy, Sai Wuyen, had 100 holes in his heart. Who knew that he would poison Bai Ji to death? Bai Chio was even more nervous than her. After all, it was his father. They had not seen each other for 2 years. He did not expect to meet with such a scene. However, the antidote was very effective. Bai Ji woke up quickly. Gong Yimo finally breathed a sigh of relief. She asked Bai Chio to feed Bai Ji some food, and then she went to rest. Recently, she had been trembling with fear and always felt uneasy. Now that Bai Ji was awake, she was slightly relieved and could sleep well. Bai Ji was surprised to see Bai Chio. Wasn't he held hostage by Liu Jin? Sometimes, Liu Jin would feed him some antidote to wake him up and then force him to tell him the whereabouts of the other half of the Tiger Tally. When he woke up, he was not in the Dragon City barracks. Moreover, he saw his son. Did he come back to Jiao City? The father and son had not seen each other for a long time. Bai Chio first knelt down and apologized. Then, he told Bai Ji everything that happened during this period of time. Bai Ji was mute. He closed his eyes and his eyebrows were filled with anger. This must be Empress Dowager Yu's plot. Because he rejected her invitation to cooperate, she turned around and attacked Liu Jin. However, now was not the time to find trouble with the Empress Dowager. He had to go back and reorganize the Dragon City barracks. The next day, Bai Ji rested well. With Bai Chio's help, they went to Gong Yimo's courtyard. This matter could not be delayed. Bai Ji decided to return immediately. Gong Yimo was not worried about him, because the Dragon City camp had been peaceful for many years, and the people inside were all supported by Bai Ji. As long as he woke up, he would be more useful than anyone else, not to mention that he also had the Tiger Tally in his hand, so she did not need to go back. She would let Bai Ji solve the problem of the Dragon City camp himself. Gong Yimo calmly accepted his bow and personally helped him up. General Bai, you don't have to be so courteous. I'm well aware of this matter. You don't have to say anything more. Go back and organize your affairs. Bai Ji nodded repeatedly. Suddenly, he pointed at Bai Chio. Gong Yimo touched her chin and guessed, "You want Bai Chio to stay?" Bai Ji nodded. No, he's your son. Maybe he can help you." Gong Yimo was sweating profusely. If she kept a man by her side for a long time, Gong Dai would definitely find trouble with her if he found out, but Bai Ji was very stubborn. He glared at Bai Chio, and Bai Chio immediately knelt down. Father doesn't have any other meaning. He thinks that now that the Dragon City camp is in chaos, if I go with you, I might be used by Liu Jin. After all, Liu Jin is a very sinister person. We have to be careful. So father wants me to stay with you for the time being. So it's like this. Gong Yimo let out a sigh of relief. She was afraid that Bai Ji would not be able to repay her for saving his life, so he asked his son to marry her. Seeing that Gong Yimo agreed, Bai Ji left with Chang's aid. He looked very anxious. Obviously, he was very worried about the situation of the Dragon City camp. Gong Yimo sighed. This person was still the same as before, but he was a trustworthy person. Bai Chio was a little embarrassed. He suddenly remembered that his father asked him to go to the room to talk last night. Do you like the princess? Bai Ji's pen was very sharp. He did not write nonsense on the paper. Bai Chio and his father's serious face instantly turned red. Father, what nonsense are you talking about? He hated women. He, Would not like anyone. Then you go back to the Dragon City camp with me. Bai Ji wrote again. Bai Chio frowned. If he also left, wouldn't Gong Yimo have to stay in Yuchi alone? Even if she was very powerful, she was still a woman. There were a lot of things that women could not do. Seeing that Bai Chio did not say anything, Bai Ji frowned and wrote again. You still say that you don't like the princess? Father. Bai Chio flew into a rage out of humiliation. I don't like your son. I don't like women. Bai Ji sighed. He knew that because of his mother, his son had been very repulsed by women since he was young. He felt that women were fickle and full of lies. However, he also didn't want to see his son grow old alone, so he wrote, then you can stay. How can I do that? Now that we are not in the Dragon City camp, who knows what Liu Jin did? What happened? One more person, one more helper. Bai Chio was even more worried about his father. Bai Ji sighed, your temper is too impulsive. You still need to temper yourself. If you follow me, you will only drag me down. The veins on Bai Chio's forehead popped out. What kind of father was this? Couldn't he be more tactful with his words? How could he be so tactful with his words? Bai Ji wrote, Liu Jin is a sinister person. If he set you up and used you to threaten me, I can only put righteousness before family. Bai Chio did not say anything. I will stay. He must have a fake father. After a few days, Gong Dai could move his body slightly. But once he moved, his muscles would become very sore. This poison was really overbearing. Gong Dai was annoyed that he was poisoned, but he also felt that he was indeed poisoned. As expected, the royal sister was his only weakness. Lo Chi put Gong Dai on the wheelchair that he had rushed to make in the past few days. He felt that his prince was really powerful. He knew everything. Then, they went down to the dungeon. Xue Qi and Xue Zhon were not injured, but they were very nervous. This was because they knew that once Gong Dai came, they would be in trouble. Xue Qi was calmer. After living for so long, she had already disregarded life and death. But Xue Zhon was different. He was not worried about himself, but he was worried that Xue Qi would not be able to withstand Gong Dai's torture. Prince, you came to the dungeon to see me. I'm really flattered. Cough, cough. Xue Qi sat in the dungeon and looked at Gong Dai. She was not afraid at all. Old Madam Xue, you are quite calm. I guess you don't fear death anymore. Of course, I don't fear death. Xue Qi closed her eyes and accepted her fate. However, when Xue Zhon, who was in another dungeon, saw this, he said angrily, Gong Dai, if you dare to harm even a hair on my madam's head, I will surely bury Gong Yimo with her. A cold glint flickered in Gong Dai's eyes as he looked at Xue Zhon. You are Lu Yi's lord of the Holy Lake, yet you have such a strong murderous aura despite your age. It seems like I have been too lenient with you. After he spoke, Gong Dai waved his hand, and some people walked into Xue Qi's dungeon. They didn't care whether their subordinates were white-haired old men or not. As long as Gong Dai gave them an order, they would not hesitate to kill them. Gong Dai, don't you dare. Xue Zhon, who was still in the dungeon, glared at Gong Dai ferociously. Madam is Gong Yimo's grandmother. If you dare to harm her, Gong Yimo will not let you off. Gong Dai chuckled. It seems like you don't understand, royal sister. Chapter 456. At this moment, Xue Qi opened her eyes and looked over. She heard Gong Dai continue speaking. In royal sister's heart, there are only two kinds of people. They are outsiders and her own people. Gong Dai looked coldly at the old lady. Granny Xue, who do you think you are to royal sister? Xue Qi sighed. We are just one step behind each other. Cough, cough. You can kill me or torture me as you wish. Madam. Xue Zhon was unwilling to accept this. He had come here with his madam to make Gong Dai lower his guard. They had made ample preparations, and they had assumed that they would be able to take down Gong Dai. Moreover, didn't Gong Dai say that he cared a lot about Gong Yimo's matter? But, even in such a situation, he hadn't fallen into their trap. Gong Dai. You don't care about Gong Yimo at all. Otherwise, why would you be alerted so quickly? This is impossible. Xue Zhon couldn't understand why they had lost, and he was unwilling to accept this. They hadn't shown any malice toward Gong Yimo, and his madam was Gong Yimo's grandmother. So, why didn't Gong Dai care about them at all? Gong Dai didn't feel like explaining this to them. Since they had learned about what had happened to royal sister before him, he had suspected that the Snow Clan was involved in this matter. Moreover, they had seen the Snow Clan's underground sacrificial ceremony. How many good people would use such a cruel and twisted sacrificial ceremony? It was no wonder that the Snow Clan had been exterminated. Do it. Gong Dai watched calmly as his subordinates tied up Xueqi. Xueqi didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. She was old, and her body wasn't good. When she was tied up, she was in so much pain that she started sweating. When Xuezhon saw this, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Gong Dai. Gong Dai had a headache because of Xuezhon. Since they had dared to come here, they should have been prepared to fail and be killed. But, before that, they could still play with them. When Xuezhon saw that Xueqi was tied up on a human frame and that his martial arts were sealed, he was so anxious that he started sweating. Gong Dai said, "It's not impossible for me to let her go, but I want the antidote." He couldn't wait another month. He was going to look for the royal sister right now. The royal sister was the most dishonest of all. If he didn't watch her, who knew what she would do? But Xuezhon's old face was tense. After a while, he said, "There is no antidote." "No." Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. On the other side, the guard immediately made his move and a whip landed on the old woman's body. The old woman was quite strong-willed. She only cried out in pain and did not beg for mercy. Gong Dai. Xuezhon grabbed the bars of the cell with both hands, his fingers almost digging into the wood. "There really is no antidote. They didn't give me the antidote. Moreover, this poison wouldn't kill people, it would only make them unconscious. You haven't been poisoned too deeply. With the godly doctor around, you'll be fine for a month or so. Why do you need an antidote?" Gong Dai was unmoved. He waved his hand and signaled them to continue whipping. A suppressed cry of pain could be heard. Gong Dai's face was hidden in the darkness, so no one could see his emotions. He was really whipping. He didn't care that his opponent was an old woman who couldn't resist at all. A person like him didn't have any bottom line or principles. There were only two kinds of people who could be touched and those who couldn't. Xuezhon looked at the whip landing on Xueqi's body. Her clothes were dyed red with blood, and he wished he could take her place. His eyes were bloodshot, and his voice was hoarse. "There really isn't any antidote. Gong Dai. I really don't have the antidote." Xuezhon's voice was close to begging. Gong Dai ordered the guards to whip Xuezhon a few more times. When he saw that Xuezhon was in so much pain that his whole body was trembling, he finally believed him and ordered the guards to stop. "So, there really isn't any antidote." Gong Dai sighed. He felt that it was a pity. Xuezhon wished he could bite him to death. Gong Dai did this just to test whether he was telling the truth or not. Did he have any humanity left in him? Madam was already so old. Didn't he know what it meant to be soft-hearted? Xueqi's head was lowered, and it seemed like she had fainted. Gong Dai wasn't worried at all. "So, let's change the question." Xuezhon looked at him cautiously. "Why did you poison her? Why did you want to harm the royal sister?" The royal sister was Xueqi's child. Wasn't Xueqi a member of the Snow Clan? Why did he hate her so much? Xuezhon gritted his teeth. He couldn't answer this question. "You can't answer." Gong Dai raised his finger. The guards in the prison also raised their whips. If he didn't answer, Madam would surely die. Xuezhon closed his eyes. "This matter has nothing to do with the Snow Clan. It was me and Madam who wanted to do this." "Oh." Gong Dai believed him a little. After all, if everyone had agreed, they wouldn't have had to take such a risk. Even if this plan had a high possibility of success. Gong Dai looked at his hand and smiled bitterly. The reason? What could they gain by doing this? "It's all Gong Yimo's fault," Xuezhon said angrily. She was a child of the Snow Clan, but she recognized a thief as her father. She even made the Dai Yu state prosper step by step. All of this was built on the bones of the Snow Clan's people. Since the Snow Clan allowed her to be born, the Snow Clan should kill her for betraying the country. Gong Dai finally understood that the two of them were hostile to the royal sister. That so-called holy stone wasn't a good thing. Luckily, the royal sister didn't fall for it. As for whether the other members of the Snow Clan were good or bad, he would see in the future. Moreover, this person kept saying that the royal sister was a child of the Snow Clan. Gong Dai suppressed the restlessness in his heart and said coldly, "You want to kill the royal sister because of this?" Gong Dai sneered. "Do I look like I'm easy to fool?" Shuizhan's heart shivered. However, this was the only thing he could say. Even if he had to die, he couldn't say anything. Believe it or not, Gong Yimo is wary of the Snow Clan. That's why we asked you to threaten her. Unfortunately, we were wrong. This is the truth. Gong Dai didn't believe it and ordered them to continue beating her. At this time, Xueqi had already fainted. However, the whip marks on her body were real injuries. Gong Dai. Shuizhan gritted his teeth. "I didn't lie to you. I really didn't lie to you. Stop it." Gong Dai sat there with his eyes closed. If he didn't tell them to stop, how could they stop? Anyway, even if they were beaten to death, they deserved to die for daring to attack him. Gong Dai. Shuizhan couldn't hold it in anymore. "You asked me because you wanted to know if Gong Yimo was a descendant of the Dai Yu state. I really have a way to prove it." "Stop it." Gong Ju opened his eyes and stared at him with an imperceptible brilliance. "Oh. Let's hear it." Shuizhan gritted his teeth. "If you want me to say it, I can. However, I said that you can't kill us." Gong Dai smiled. "That depends on whether I'm satisfied with what you say." The muscles on Shuizhan's face were twitching. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only tear his clothes apart and take out something from the interlayer. Gong Yi squinted and looked at it. It looked like a small piece of parchment. "This is the Snow Clan's treasure map." His hands were trembling. However, he thought that losing the map was better than losing his wife. Therefore, he took out the map and bit his finger in front of Gong Dai. Then, he dripped his blood on the map. Chapter 457. A strange thing happened. The map could absorb blood. When the blood seeped into the map, the lines on the map appeared. Only the blood of the Snow Clan can reveal the map's true form. Only the Snow Clan can open the Snow Clan's treasure. This map can prove Gong Yimo's bloodline. Pure Snow Clan blood can seep into the map, but other people's blood cannot. When the blood dries up, the map will disappear. "You can try." Lo Chi, who was standing beside Gong Dai, quickly walked over and took the map. He bit his finger and dripped his blood on it. As expected, the blood could not seep into the map. But when Lo Chi smeared the blood of the unconscious old Madame Shuer on the map, it was instantly absorbed. More lines appeared on the map. It really was a map. "Can you let Madame go now?" The Snow Clan suppressed their anger and asked. Millimeter Gong Dai nodded. "I said I won't kill you, so I won't go back on my word. But, since you are so useful, I will need you when I go to the Snow Clan's treasure. So, you can stay as guests." Shuizhan was speechless. He already knew that Gong Dai would not let them go so easily, but as long as he did not torture them, Madame Shuizhan really could not stand Gong Dai's Jiao prison. Gong Dai received a satisfactory answer and left the prison. Only the Snow Clan could do it. When Gong Dai came out, the first thing he did was to have Lo Chi secretly capture a few Snow Clan members. Dai Yu State still had many Snow Clan members who were willing to submit. In the end, they became citizens of Dai Yu State. Those who were older were the so-called pure Snow Clan blood. Lo Chi obeyed and left. Gong Dai did not stay idle. In this period of time, his body could not move much, but his brain was still working quickly. He looked at the map and drew out the most suitable routes for each region. He did not forget that he was here to fix the roads. As for the royal sister, Gong Dai finally sighed, but the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, with a trace of a smile and helplessness. If the poison couldn't be cured at once, he couldn't leave because his martial arts were temporarily suppressed. His muscles were sore and he had no strength. However, he had a lot of enemies, so he really couldn't find the royal sister now. He really wanted to be with the royal sister, but he had to be healthy. Otherwise, The royal sister would have to protect him. Wouldn't he be a burden to her? Gong Dai was reluctant. Therefore, he wrote a letter to Gong Yimo, saying that he was fine and that she should not worry. Before sending the letter, Gong Dai caressed the letter, his heart filled with love. He was such a cold person, it was really difficult for him to show such a gentle side. If royal sister really wasn't his biological sister and they had nothing to do with each other, then, they could have two adorable children. They could have a daughter who looked like royal sister and a son who could protect their daughter forever. That would be very blissful. A family of 4, his and Momo's home. Gong Yimo suddenly felt a chill and rubbed her arms. Ignoring the matters of the Dragon City barracks, she brought Bai Chio and followed Sai Wuyen to the capital of Jade Palace, Jade City. It was worth mentioning that Sai Wuyen and the Empress Dowager were fighting fiercely in private. However, on the surface, they still lived together in the same Jade Palace. Upon entering the city, Gong Yimo felt oppressed. Although the Jade Palace was bustling as usual, the hidden turbulence made people feel as if they were treading on thin ice. Sai Wuyen's carriage was very big and luxurious. Gong Yimo sat in his carriage and looked out, trying her best to ignore the lunatic beside her. He actually refused to let Gong Yimo and Bai Chio ride together. He was really sick. Gong Yimo looked out of the window, but she could feel Sai Wuyen's gaze sweeping across her body like a ray. It was as if he was evaluating her value, but also as if he was hesitating about something. At this moment, there was a commotion on the street. It turned out that someone was dragging a woman into the carriage. The woman did not comply and let out a terrified cry. Sai Wuyen frowned. Who was so daring? His subordinates clearly understood him and quickly went to check. They quickly returned. Your Majesty, it's the Marquis of Changjun. He seems to be drunk. A woman accidentally bumped into him and he took a fancy to her. He wants to forcefully drag her into his residence. The voice of the person who reported became softer and softer. Because of this, it was obvious that the other party did not put Sai Wuyen in his eyes. It was no wonder. The Marquis of Changjun was the nephew of the Empress Dowager. Usually, the Empress Dowager doted on him. Therefore, he was not of the same bloodline as the Emperor. Naturally, he did not put the Emperor in his eyes. Go and save her. Seeing Sai Wuyen's cold expression, Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows. She did not expect this guy to have a righteous side. However, his confidant Ji Yuse did not agree. Your Majesty, it's best not to interfere with the Marquis of Changjuan's matters. This person is powerful and has some ability. Maybe we can win him over and he will be of help. After all, at this time, they should fight for any power and not offend them. Sai Wuyen did not speak. Ji Yuse sighed in his heart. If only the general was here. He would definitely persuade the emperor to turn a blind eye. Perhaps he would even send a few more women to the Marquis of Changjun to win him over. At this time, a man's laughter came from the other side. It turned out that the Marquis of Changjun was deliberately teasing the woman. He did not allow anyone to interfere and only let the guards surround the woman to prevent her from running away. Then, he personally went to catch her. The woman was so scared that she cried and screamed, but no one dared to save her. Sai Wuyen's face became uglier when he heard the lewd laughter. In the end, he smiled gently. Can't offend him? Sai Wuyen thought about this word carefully. Go and tell the Marquis of Changjun that I have taken a fancy to this woman. Your Majesty. Ji Yuse looked conflicted. The Marquis of Changjun was famous for being a scoundrel. If the emperor interfered, he might be humiliated. Why aren't you going? Sai Wuyen narrowed his eyes. Ji Yuse had no choice but to bite the bullet and go. Gong Yimo watched. She originally thought that if one was not capable enough, one should not meddle. However, the woman was pitiful. If Sai Wuyen really wanted to save her, then so be it. After all, she would not be the one to bear the consequences. As expected, the Marquis of Changjun heard this and asked loudly, What? Your Majesty? He tried his best to look behind him with his small eyes. Sure enough, he saw Sai Wuyen's carriage. His eyes lit up, and he swallowed his saliva. Your Majesty also likes this girl. At this time, he had already caught the woman. His fat hand turned the woman's face to look from left to right. No matter how he looked, she was only pretty. The woman was so scared that she trembled. She was so ashamed that she wanted to die. It seemed that the little emperor could not stand to see this and came to find trouble. The Marquis of Changjun rolled his eyes. When he thought of Sai Wuyen's face, he smiled maliciously. Originally, His Majesty's decree. As a subject, I must obey. However, I did not even see His Majesty's shadow. Who knows if you are fooling me? Fake the decree? Chapter 458. Ji Se knew that this person was difficult to deal with, so he said impatiently, "Do you think you can see His Majesty just because you want to?" The Marquis of Changjun was not angry when he heard this. He kissed the face of the weeping woman in his arms and said with narrowed eyes, "Then I have no choice. Do you think I will listen to a small soldier like you?" Many people could not stand it anymore. How could this person be so shameless? However, they could not afford to offend him because of his high status. They could only sneak a glance and then avoid him. Suddenly, there was a cry of surprise from the crowd. The Marquis of Changjun opened his eyes wide and looked up. He saw a sea of red coming from afar. Even the sun lost its color. He immediately threw away the woman in his arms and rushed forward a few steps. When he saw Sai Wuyen, he first looked at his face greedily and then bowed. However, his eyes never left Sai Wuyen's face when he bowed. His high and mighty appearance was really impulsive. He really wanted to see him fall into the dust, his red clothes stained with blood, and his humble appearance begging for mercy. "Your Majesty," the Marquis of Changjun smiled. Sai Wuyen did not want to say more. "I like this girl, but you don't seem to be willing to give her up." "Of course not." The Marquis of Changjun smiled apologetically. "Let's not talk about this girl. As long as your Majesty likes her, I will send 10 beauties to the palace tonight. No need." Sai Wuyen was too lazy to talk to this person. He ordered Ji Se to take the girl and leave. However, the Marquis of Changjun was drunk and lustful. How could he let the girl go so easily? He tried to grab Sai Wuyen's hand, but Sai Wuyen pushed his hand away. "Dongji, how dare you?" Sai Wuyen glared at him. He used his handkerchief to wipe the place where the Marquis of Changjuan's hand. His face was full of disgust. If not for the fact that this person was still useful, he really wanted to chop off his hand. Marquis Dongji of Changjun was still reminiscing about the feeling of Sai Wuyen's delicate skin. It was said that in order to keep Sai Wuyen's skin fresh and tender, Auntie had bathed him with a special potion since he was young. As a result, even though he was a man, his skin was smoother and more tender than a woman's. It even had its own fragrance. It really made people unable to part with it. "Your Majesty, a chance encounter is not as good as a chance encounter. This place is not far from the Marquis's mansion. Why don't you rest at my place?" Sai Wuyen was so angry that he laughed. Even if it was a cold laugh, it still made Dongji stare blankly. He wanted nothing more than to drag the emperor back to his manor and play with him. He was not afraid of the emperor. If the emperor had poisoned him, his aunt would be able to cure him. Moreover, he had great power in his hands. As long as this little emperor has some brains, he would know that I can't offend him too much. However, if the little emperor is willing to offer himself, it's not impossible to make him change sides. Ha 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 ha. Very good, you're not afraid of death. In that moment, Sai Wuyen didn't care if it was useful or not. He wanted this stupid pig to die. He wanted him to die right now. Dongji thought it through and became even more courageous. Dying under a peony flower, being a ghost is also romantic. Sai Wuyen took a deep breath. The poison arrow in his hand was ready to be shot again. This was a poison that sealed the throat the moment it touched blood. No matter how powerful Mother Empress was, she couldn't bring the dead back to life. Right now, he didn't think about the consequences. In any case, between him and Mother Empress, it was already a situation where one side would not rest until one side died. The Marquis of Changjun really has eyes but can't see. Suddenly, a female voice sounded. It made everyone present, including the passers-by, stop and look over. It was clearly cursing, but when it was said by that clear voice, Dongji didn't feel angry at all. He saw a woman lift the curtain of the carriage and come down. If Sai Wuyan's red clothes were like the sun, then Gong Yimo's blue clothes were like the sky and the sea. There was a kind of indescribable calmness and grace that made her unapproachable. Seeing her gaze drift over, Dongji's body instantly went numb. She was like a fairy, but she was only like this. "Who are you?" he couldn't help but ask. And Sai Wuyan slightly frowned. He didn't like Gong Yimo being stared at by this stupid pig. Gong Yimo softly laughed. "Is it important who I am? Isn't it enough that I'm good-looking?" Her slightly raised voice made Dongji's saliva flow. You're right. Dongji smiled at the emperor. "Your Majesty, you're too unkind. Such a beauty, you actually want to enjoy it alone?" He walked towards Gong Yimo step by step, saying, "Your Majesty, this subject will definitely offer over 100 beauties later. As for this one, she'll belong to me." He pounced towards Gong Yimo, but Gong Yimo turned around and dodged. Her voice carried a smile. "The Marquis of Changjun should think clearly. I'm not those ordinary girls. If you touch me, the consequences will be very serious." But this tone was so charming. How was it serious? Dongji only felt that his eyes weren't enough. How could there be such a beautiful woman? If it's serious, then it's serious. This Marquis just wants you. As he spoke, he pounced again. But this time, Gong Yimo didn't dodge. Instead, she waved her hand back. A fragrant wind blew over. It was supposed to be a beautiful scene, but a miserable scream rang out. When everyone came back to their senses, Dongji was already rolling on the ground in pain. The scary thing was that his left hand had been cut off from the wrist. And the severed hand fell to the side and was still twitching. This time, the guards who were originally prepared to watch a good show all drew their swords and quickly surrounded Gong Yimo. Someone dragged Dongji away. He still hadn't fainted and kept shouting, "Ah! Witch, kill her! Quickly kill her!" Gong Yimo's dagger was stained with blood. Her sleeves were also stained with blood. It was like plum blossoms blooming, too beautiful to behold. She slowly wiped off the blood on her dagger and innocently said, "He was the one who said that under the peony flower, he was willing to die. Moreover, is this consort someone that is qualified to touch?" At this time, Sai Wuyan had already seen a good show. He was very satisfied. It was better for Gong Yimo to make a move than him, so he laughed. "How dare you? She is Daiyu State's Jiyu State's eldest princess. She is Zhen's honored guest. Why aren't you retreating?" "But, she injured the Marquis." Someone shouted unwillingly. Gong Yimo walked forward step by step towards Dongji. The guards who were supposed to stop her retreated step by step for some reason. She seemed to have an invisible force. When she took a step forward, it made people retreat in fear. So much so that she walked unimpeded in front of Dongji, scaring him so much that his face turned pale. "Ah, what are you still standing there for? Quickly take her down." He was in so much pain that he was sweating profusely. When the guards heard this, they stepped forward again. However, Gong Yimo used her hidden sword and pushed them back. In the next second, the tip of her sword was pointed at Dongji's nose. The sword trembled slightly. Dongji was originally howling in pain, but at this moment, he endured the pain and didn't dare to move. "Don't hurt the Marquis," someone shouted, but no one dared to take a step closer. Indeed, like master, like servant. Many commoners were delighted to see the despicable Marquis Changjuan's hand being chopped off. They watched from the shadows without blinking. Gong Yimo pointed her sword at him and asked with a smile, "This consort is Daiyu State's most honorable princess. My status is comparable to the crown prince. Who are you? You disrespected this consort, so this consort chopped off your hand. Do you have any complaints?" Chapter 459. Do you have any complaints? Do you dare to have any complaints? Dongji was in so much pain that he couldn't think. But at that moment, the aura that erupted from Gong Yimo's body made him tremble. Whether he was angry or begging for mercy, all of it was stuck in his throat. After a while, Gong Yimo put away her sword and gave a light smile. "This princess is in a good mood today, so I won't kill you." But next time, you won't have this kind of luck. As she said this, she turned to leave. Dongji suddenly came back to his senses. The pain and resentment won over his fear. He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Someone come! This witch injured this marquis. Capture her." Dongji's 20 guards looked at each other. They normally helped the Marquis of Changjun do evil and had never lost a single time. But today, this was clearly an iron plate. Were they going to kick it? The hesitation of his subordinates made Dongji even angrier. His head was covered in sweat as he kicked the person next to him. "Scram! If you don't catch her, you can all die." His words of deterrence still had an effect. His bodyguard approached Gong Yimo, clenching his swords tightly. They clearly didn't fight. They didn't understand why they were so afraid of her. Perhaps she was too decisive when she cut off his hand. Gong Yimo was a bit impatient. She tilted her head and looked at Dongji. "Have you thought it through? This princess is the princess of Dai Yu State. Pay." Dongji had never suffered such a big loss. He had to make this woman pay with her blood. "I don't care where you're the princess, sigh." He sucked in air from the pain, but the viciousness in his eyes became stronger. "In Yuchi, in this Marquis' eyes, you're just a slut who's played too much. Go die." He wanted to peel off her skin and pull out her tendons, but before he did that, he wanted to play with her from top to bottom, then throw her to the servants to play with. What princess? In Yuchi, he had the final say. Sai Wuyen originally wanted to intervene because Marquis Changjun couldn't die in the hands of Gong Yimo in broad daylight. However, after hearing Dongji's arrogant words, he snorted and decided not to interfere. If he wanted to die, then so be it. Don't blame others for seeking death. Gong Yimo glanced at Sai Wuyen and said to Dongji, "How arrogant. Yu Qi, do you have the final say?" However, Dongji no longer had the strength to answer her. He directly ordered his subordinates to attack. Seeing that the matter was getting out of hand, some of the commoners did not dare to watch anymore. They did not know what would happen to the princess from Dai Yu State. However, when they thought of the Empress Dowager behind the Marquis of Changjun, they felt that things were getting out of hand. Moreover, the Marquis of Changjun usually bullied men and women, committing all kinds of crimes. Every day, fresh female corpses would be thrown out of the Marquis mansion. This princess, what a pity. Because of fear, the streets suddenly became deserted. Dongji's subordinates had already drawn their swords and slashed at Gong Yimo. These people had a strange fear of Gong Yimo, so they did not treat her as a woman at all. Since they were bullying her, Gong Yimo would not be passive. She directly killed the first person who rushed in front of her without hesitation. Seeing that the princess killed people without hesitation, the remaining people were a little scared. However, the Marquis of Changjun was still screaming behind them. They did not dare to retreat. Just when they were in a dilemma, they heard an announcement. The Empress Dowager has arrived. The Empress Dowager had arrived. A series of footsteps were heard. Following that, the Imperial Guards sealed off the streets. Originally, it was just a matter of kidnapping a commoner. However, in the end, it became a duel between the Empress Dowager and the Emperor. This time, Sai Wuyen could no longer watch the show. He strode forward and bowed to the gorgeous carriage. "Your son respectfully welcomes the Empress Dowager." When he said this, his attitude was very respectful. It seemed that the relationship between mother and son was very good. Dongji's guards took the opportunity to stop and dragged Dongji away to treat his injuries. Gong Yimo also took the opportunity to put away her sword. The white curtain was pulled open layer by layer, revealing a graceful and luxurious woman. She was waving a feather fan in her hand. She did not shout and said slowly with half-closed eyes, "My son, you just entered the city and you already made such a scene. Why?" Sai Wuyen stood up and smiled wickedly. "Your son wanted to enter the city quietly. However, I encountered the Dong family committing a crime on the street. That's why I took action." Committing a crime? Dong Luani looked down at Sai Wuyen arrogantly. How is kidnapping a woman considered committing a crime? For an ant-like woman, you actually injured your own cousin. Don't you feel ashamed? As she spoke, one of the imperial guards carried a woman forward. That woman was the girl who had escaped in the chaos. Unexpectedly, she had fallen into the hands of the Empress Dowager. This meant that the Empress Dowager had been waiting for a long time. The imperial guard let go and the woman fell to the ground. At this time, she was covered in blood. It was obvious that she had been beaten up. However, she could not help but crawl toward Cai Wuyan. It was as if she knew that only Cai Wuyan was sincere in saving her here. Save me. She lay on the ground and begged. Cai Wuyan frowned and bent down to help the woman up. Empress Dowager, she is a citizen of Yuchi. She is not an ant. Sitting high on the palanquin, Dong Luani snorted softly. Waving the feather fan in her hand, she sighed and said, "You've done everything you can to please those old antiques. Look at what kind of pedantic ideas they've taught you. My good child, those are all wrong." Cai Wuyan said neither humbly nor arrogantly. "They taught me that water can carry a boat or sink it. Since they are citizens of Yuchi, they are my responsibility." Dong Luani narrowed her eyes and covered her mouth with her fan. "Then did they teach you that you must always be vigilant?" Cai Wuyan suddenly became alert. However, it was too late. His body was so weak. How could he avoid the intentional attack of the person beside him? Although the dagger missed, it still left a long bloody wound on Cai Wuyan's chest. Cai Wuyan covered the wound and looked at the girl beside him in disbelief. The dagger fell to the ground. She knelt on the ground and cried. I'm sorry. She said that if I don't do this, she will sell me to the brothel. I'm sorry. Your Majesty. Ji Se rushed forward and sealed Cai Wuyan's acupoints to stop the bleeding. Ayaya. Dong Luani, who was watching a good show, laughed. "Look, how long has it been since you left Mother's side? How did you become so kind? Mother once said that no one can be trusted. People who wag their tails and beg you 1 second can give you a fatal blow the next second. Look at you, the more you live, the more backward you become." Cai Wuyan gritted his teeth. He was so angry that his whole body trembled. However, he could not bear it. Thank you for your teachings, Mother." He lowered his eyes, which were filled with madness and resentment. "Raise your head," Dong Luani ordered sternly. Cai Wuyan took a deep breath and raised his head. His eyes were big and narrow, but they were filled with resentment and disapproval. Dong Luani looked at him carefully and sighed after a while. "My son. How many times have I told you that you don't need sympathy and righteousness? When you were resentful, your eyes were so beautiful. Unlike now, they are so disgusting." Chapter 460. At this time, Dongji's injury was bandaged and brought to the Empress Dowager. His face was pale as he complained while crying, "Aunt, you have to seek justice for your nephew. Your nephew lost an arm. How can your nephew serve you in the future?" At this time, the girl's cries annoyed Dong Luani and she frowned. "Bring her here." The imperial guards obeyed and hurriedly dragged the blooded girl to the Empress Dowager. Her face was full of fear, not knowing what the Empress Dowager wanted to do. She widened her eyes and sobbed, "Empress Dowager. This humble girl has done it. Don't hit me." She was frightened like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Dong Luani glanced at her and then looked away in disdain. "Ji, you lost an arm because of this trash?" The danger in Dong Luani's tone made Dongji shrink his neck. In addition, his wrist was still very painful after the medicine was applied, so he didn't answer immediately. Dong Luani smiled and asked the emperor, "Imperial son, look, this kind of woman who repaid kindness with enmity, what are you waiting for? Aijia will give you a chance, kill her." "Imperial mother." Cai Wuyan widened his eyes and his lips were slightly pale. "Return to the palace, Jin is tired." But how could Dong Luani let it go? She shook her head. "Imperial son, when did you learn to be soft-hearted? She is a woman, but she caused your cousin to lose his arm and you to be injured. Why don't you punish her? You were still the same as before, vicious and merciless. Unfortunately, you went out and came back disobedient. You made Aijia very unhappy. When Aijia is unhappy, Aijia likes to torment people, such as amputating this woman's limbs. Don't worry, If she doesn't die after her limbs are amputated, Ijia will spare her. The more she spoke, the more she laughed. No. No. The girl was clearly frightened by Dongluani's gloomy words. She looked at the surrounding imperial guards and finally crawled to Sai Wuyan for help. Your Majesty, save me. I didn't do it on purpose, I didn't. She cried again. She had just come out to buy some goods but suffered such an unexpected disaster. Even if she died, her parents would have no way to redress her injustice. Sai Wuyan pulled the hem of his clothes out of her hands. Looking at her dirty appearance, he frowned slightly. Imperial Mother, since you've already said that she's an ant-like existence, why waste your time arguing with her? A heavy pressure came from the palanquin. The Empress Dowager was displeased. She covered half of her face with her feather fan. What if I insist on being calculative? Her gaze fell coldly on the trembling girl as if she was looking at a dead person. Either you kill her with one strike, or I chop her into a human swine and give it to you. My son, what do you choose? At this moment, what choice could he make? They were surrounded by the Empress Dowager's men. They had surrounded the place, but Sai Wuyan had only brought a dozen men with him. How could he choose? At this moment, an imperial guard pulled out his saber and handed it to Sai Wuyan with both hands, forcing him to do so. Seeing Sai Wuyan clench his teeth in embarrassment, Dongluani narrowed her eyes and looked at him with indescribable satisfaction. Since he was young, she had used Sai Wuyan as a tool. She forced him to kill people and poison people. She forced him to become more and more ruthless. Seeing that his claws were getting sharper by the day, she damaged his body so that he could no longer practice martial arts. This way, he would never be able to hurt his master. Wasn't it very interesting? She just didn't expect that, after the wolf cub went out once, his originally mold temperament would change back. He even wanted to resist her. How could she not be angry? Seeing Sai Wuyan pick up the saber, and the fiercer his gaze, the more satisfied she was. It was as if the obedient him of the past had returned. She really missed the past. Sai Wuyan lowered his head and looked at the girl who was wagging her tail at his feet. This was the person who had attacked him mercilessly a second ago. Now, she was so pitiful that he could no longer sympathize with her. Perhaps this was the Empress Dowager's scheme. She wanted to extinguish his sympathy and make him completely lose his humanity. How could this be? He raised the saber. Wasn't it just a person? What was there to regret about dying? At this moment, he didn't seem to understand why he wanted to save her. Really, what a great show. A sudden voice interrupted. Sai Wuyan's originally red eyes became cold and clear. He looked over and saw a touch of blue. It was incompatible with the blood red on his body, but it was so calm and clean. Very few people could suppress a color like peacock blue. That gorgeous embroidered skirt and the decorative jadeite on her body, as long as she appeared, she would definitely be the most eye-catching color in the crowd. Moreover, her skin was delicate and white, and her facial features were even more stunning. Therefore, from the beginning, Dongluani deliberately ignored Gong Yimo. Who asked Gong Yimo to try to cut off Dongji's hand as a warning to others? Since that was the case, Dongluani also wanted to do the same. A princess from Daiyu State dared to be so arrogant in Yuchi. Did she really think that there was no one in Yuchi? Seeing Gong Yimo walk step by step towards her, Dongluani smiled coldly. I was wondering who it was. So it's the princess of Jiyu State from Daiyu State. I apologize for not noticing you just now. Gong Yimo didn't care at all. The Empress Dowager is very busy every day. It's normal that you don't remember a small character like me. However, may I ask, what wrong did this woman commit that you want to kill her on the spot? Dongluani leaned on the couch of the sedan and fanned herself. She asked softly. She tried to assassinate the emperor in public. Does her crime not warrant death? When the woman heard this, she knew that crying was useless. She shouted resentfully, "It's you. You forced me to do this." Oh! Dongluani raised her brows slightly. Her every move was seductive. Then why don't you die if I want you to? This sentence was like a fishbone stuck in the woman's throat. She couldn't say a word. Gong Yimo smiled and nodded. The Empress Dowager is right. She offended the Emperor of Yuchi. She does deserve death. Following Gong Yimo's words, the woman's heart turned to ashes. She felt that it would be difficult to escape death today. She would rather be killed by the Emperor. That would be more straightforward. However, Gong Yimo frowned slightly and said, "Speaking of this, I also have a matter that I would like the Empress Dowager to uphold justice." "What is it?" Dong Luani asked calmly. At this moment, Dong Ji didn't dare to speak. He shrank his neck. Every time he saw the Empress Dowager, he was like a mouse seeing a cat. He didn't dare to act rashly. Just like today's matter. The Empress Dowager protected him on the surface, but she would definitely punish him behind his back. And the other party wouldn't let him off easily. As expected, Gong Yimo pointed at Dong Ji and smiled. This person was very arrogant just now. He saw that I was beautiful and wanted to do something to me. He offended me. Since this woman offended the Emperor, I think this result is also suitable for Marquis Changjun. What do you think? Dong Luani stopped fanning herself. Chapter 461. Without waiting for Dong Luani to say anything, Gong Yimo continued with an overbearing smile. Or is it that in the Empress Dowager's eyes, His Majesty is His Majesty, and I am me? A foreign princess is not worth mentioning, so what if I offended her? These words were a little heart-wrenching. Dong Luani's cold eyes swept over Dong Ji. He was so frightened that he hurriedly crawled up from the shelf and knelt down. Aunt, I'm innocent. I didn't even touch her finger. She even chopped off one of my hands. Woo-woo. I beg Aunt to uphold justice. Dong Luani glared fiercely at Dong Ji. He really couldn't do anything right. Then she looked at Gong Yimo, who was smiling calmly, and said coldly, "He offended you, so you chopped off one of his hands. That was already a punishment. But this woman is different. She wanted to kill the Emperor. According to the law, 9 generations of her family can be executed." At this time, Dong Luani was really angry. She had to kill that lowly woman to dampen Sai Wuyen's spirit. She wanted the world to see who had the final say in Yuchi, but this princess of Dai Yu state was really difficult to deal with. She couldn't help but be angry. Gong Yimo wasn't afraid of her threat at all. Instead, she nodded in agreement. The Empress Dowager is right. This kind of person deserves to die 1,000 times. But just now, the Marquis of Changjun clearly knew that I was a princess. He offended me and was taught a lesson by me. He still held a grudge and sent his subordinates to kill me. If I didn't have some tricks up my sleeves, I'm afraid I would have died in Yuchi. Offending one's superiors and trying to provoke a conflict between 2 states is also a crime punishable by 9 generations of execution, right? I'm sure the Empress Dowager is impartial and understands the seriousness of this matter. She definitely won't side with her own nephew and disregard the country's righteousness. You. Dong Luani slammed the fan on her leg. She was so angry that she couldn't speak. Gong Yimo was all smiles, but she didn't budge an inch. It seemed like they were talking about whether or not to kill the pitiful woman on the ground, but the nature was different. It involved not only the struggle between the Emperor and the Empress, but also the struggle between the Empress Dowager and Gong Yimo. If Gong Yimo made a move today, this woman would still die. In the future, Empress Dowager Yuchi would not put her in her eyes and would be even more unbridled. However, if this woman did not die today, the Empress Dowager would probably have to reconsider Gong Yimo's weight. After a while, Dong Luani finally caught her breath and sneered, "Your Highness, you have a sharp tongue. Unfortunately, in Yuchi, you can't twist the truth just by talking. Is that so?" Gong Yimo's gorgeous blue dress fluttered in the wind, and her smile was even more carefree. "But I'm not exaggerating at all. I have what Imperial Father wants the most in my hands. I'm the future Emperor of Dai Yu State, and my brother, the Crown Prince, also values me very much. My 9th brother can't bear to see me being wronged. The new Emperor of Yuheng is also my brother. King Lu Yi even sees me as a brother. This is so distressing. If they knew that I was offended in Yuchi, I don't know if they would let it go." Gong Yimo's words stunned everyone present. Sai Wuyen suddenly burst out laughing. He laughed heartily, completely ignoring Dong Luani's gloomy face. Dongji was already scared silly. Now that the medicine was taking effect, his wrist did not hurt as much. However, the people that came out of Gong Yimo's mouth made his heart ache. He was not afraid that Gong Yimo was exaggerating, because this kind of thing could not be said carelessly. Dong Luani's face was gloomy. She remembered that Yuheng had proposed to Gong Yimo not long ago, and that she had solved Lu Yi's food problem. If that was the case, she really had a background, and her mouth was as sharp as a knife. Dong Luani felt that she had underestimated Gong Yimo. The atmosphere was a little tense. Among everyone present, Gong Yimo was probably the most relaxed. Now that the three countries were trading, Yuchi would not dare to offend her for the sake of its future development. Her fearlessness made Dong Luani sigh. Finally, she glared at Gong Yimo and said angrily, "Silly child, what are you talking about? Yuchi rules the country with benevolence, how could it really make things difficult for this girl? Ijia was just scaring her." Gong Yimo smiled gently. "You mean, you don't intend to pursue her responsibility?" Dong Luani looked like she had a headache. "I won't pursue it. This is just a game between me and my son, how could it involve outsiders?" Gong Yimo nodded. Her smiling eyes fell on Dongji, making the fat on Dongji's body tremble. "The Empress Dowager is so magnanimous, but I am a little petty. This girl offended me and humiliated me, I can't tolerate it." Gong Yimo's insatiable behavior made Dong Luani's anger surge. The smile on her face cracked. "What else do you want?" Her tone was full of threats. She was very dissatisfied. Gong Yimo better behave. This was Yuchi after all, it was not a place where she could jump around as she please. Gong Yimo touched her nose. "Nothing much, just let him kneel and kowtow." The Empress Dowager was stunned. She did not know why, but she felt relieved. Dongji was not having it. "Aunt, look at your nephew's hand. Your nephew only said one wrong thing. Not only did his hand get chopped off, but he also has to suffer such humiliation. How can your nephew raise his head in front of his colleagues in the future?" The Empress Dowager hesitated. Dongji was still useful to her, so she could not be disgraced. Gong Yimo laughed from the side. "It turns out that I'm really worthless in Yuchi. I can't even offend a mere marquis. It seems that in the future, the three kingdoms will have to avoid Yuchi. I really can't afford to offend them, so why not avoid them?" Dong Luani's expression finally changed. "Why aren't you kneeling?" "Aunt." Dong Luani glared at him fiercely. The warning in her eyes extinguished Dongji's anger. He secretly gritted his teeth in Gong Yimo's direction. This was the first time he knew that a woman could be so difficult to deal with. Not only was she good with her mouth, she was also very good at using her bargaining chips and people's heart. I'm sorry." He unwillingly knelt in front of Gong Yimo, his eyes full of humiliation. When he thought of the gazes of his colleagues in the future, he wished that he could tear Gong Yimo into pieces. Gong Yimo stood there. Although her attitude was easygoing, she gave people an unapproachable feeling. "Do you know what you did wrong?" Her voice was like the clouds. Dongji was furious. He had always relied on the Empress Dowager's favor and had never suffered a loss. But today, his hand was chopped off just because he wanted to touch a girl. He was filled with hatred. Even more, he hated that he had to kneel here and apologize to his enemy. I shouldn't have tried to take advantage of you." Dongji hid the hatred in his eyes and lowered his head to apologize. "What else?" Gong Yimo calmly looked at her well-manicured fingertips and then looked at Dong Luani, who was sitting in the sedan with an ugly expression. "What else?" Dongji was humiliated. He only felt that the surrounding Imperial Guards' gazes were piercing, making him unable to raise his head. Chapter 462. I shouldn't have humiliated you. I shouldn't have sent my guards to offend you. Please forgive me, princess. I drank wine. Gong Yimo pursed her lips and smiled. "You should have." And Dongji's face turned red. Even Dong Luani, who was standing at the side, kept waving her fan. She felt that Gong Yimo was deliberately humiliating her. She had to look at the owner before beating the dog. What did she mean? Was she unhappy with her? Dong Luani secretly gritted her teeth. Previously, she had ignored Gong Yimo and forced Sai Wuyen to kill someone in front of her. She wanted to tell Gong Yimo that Sai Wuyen was not a good partner to work with. Yu Qi was her world. But now, Gong Yimo had forced her to hand over her own nephew and humiliated him again and again. It was a ruthless slap to her own face. Dong Ji had never suffered such humiliation. Although he was kneeling on the ground, the muscles on his face were trembling. He wanted to bite Gong Yimo to death. I don't know how I have offended you. He straightened his body. His small eyes were filled with ferocity as he stared at Gong Yimo. Please enlighten me, princess. Gong Yimo smiled lightly. As a subject, you didn't respect the emperor and offended your superiors. Isn't that a crime? Sai Wuyen was stunned. The smile on his face suddenly turned serious. He looked at Gong Yimo with a cold and complicated gaze. Gong Yimo didn't care and said again. As an official, you humiliated a woman on the street and bullied the people. Isn't that a crime? The woman beside Gong Yimo couldn't hold it in anymore and cried out loudly. She had suffered too much today. Those high and mighty people all treated human lives as grass. Even His Majesty had almost killed her. She didn't expect that the one who saved her in the end was the princess from the neighboring country. You're a member of the royal family, yet you don't lead by example. Instead, you keep making mistakes. Even now, you still don't know where you've gone wrong. Forgive me for being blunt, but your apology is insincere. I won't accept it. After she finished speaking, everyone was stunned. There was no other reason. When Gong Yimo said those words, although her expression was cold, the righteousness that burst out in an instant made everyone present feel ashamed of themselves. Gong Yimo looked straight at Dong Luani and bowed in front of her. My words were rude. If I have offended you, I hope the Empress Dowager can forgive me. In addition, please allow me to pay my respects to you. Long live the Empress Dowager. I am Princess Gong Yimo from Dai Yu State. Please take care of me in the future. After bowing, she stood up with a calm attitude. However, Dong Luani sat up straight and stared at her in silence. Their gazes collided. One was angry, one was calm. One was sharp, and the other was calm. It was just a moment of eye contact, but it seemed as if sparks were flying. After a while, Dong Luani sneered, I didn't expect the famous princess of Jiyu State to be a saint. Gong Yimo didn't deny it and smiled broadly. Sometimes, after being a villain for too long, it's inevitable that I want to change my taste. Unfortunately, I've wanted to be a saint since I was young. No one could ignore the weight of her words. Today's scene made Dong Luani very vigilant. She originally wanted to show her power to Gong Yimo, an outsider, but who knew that not only would she be ruthlessly slapped in the face, but she would also stand on the side of righteousness. It seemed that this princess of Dai Yu State wasn't an easy bone to chew. She was very fierce in her bones, but on the surface, she had the appearance that those sanctimonious ministers liked the most. This kind of woman had to be guarded against. After a long while, the Empress Dowager gave an order. All the imperial guards began to retreat in an orderly manner, as if they were ready to let this matter pass. Before Dong Luani left, she glanced at Gong Yimo and smiled ambiguously. Since the princess has the heart, I'll leave my good-for-nothing son to you. Of course, if you want to talk to me and be my companion, I'm very welcome. Gong Yimo and Sai Wuyen bowed at the same time. Farewell, Empress Dowager. Gong Yimo's stubbornness angered Dong Luani. Very good, princess. Take care of yourself. With that, she really left. After everyone left, Gong Yimo sighed in relief and glanced at the girl by her feet. Go home. Unexpectedly, the girl was smart. She grabbed Gong Yimo's leg and shook her head repeatedly. No. Princess, I've offended the Empress Dowager and will definitely die a horrible death. I can't go home, or else I'll implicate my parents. If the princess doesn't mind, please accept me as your servant. Gong Yimo had a headache and signaled to Sai Wuyen to handle it. Sai Wuyen handed the girl to Jiyu Se and the two of them boarded the carriage again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. After a while, Sai Wuyen suddenly sneered. You must think that I'm very useless. You must be mocking me in your heart. You must think that I'm really useless as the emperor." As he said this, the red on his body seemed to dim. But what could he do? At the beginning of the division, half of the court officials were on the Empress Dowager's side and the other half were neutral. There were not many people who supported him. They looked down on his background and did not believe him. They thought that it was the Empress Dowager's scheme. In the end, he had to work with General Jade Face to win the loyalty of a few old officials. Only then could he establish himself. However, half of the imperial guards were in the hands of the Empress Dowager and the other half was in the hands of the Empress Dowager's trusted person. This was the most troublesome part for him, so he had always been cautious. The Empress Dowager had many eyes and ears in the imperial city. Gong Yimo looked at him from head to toe. "You're quite useless. After 4 years, you're still so passive." Cai Wuyan was not convinced that she did not know how to speak. She did not know how difficult his situation was at that time. At the beginning, he could not even leave the palace. Now he had people and soldiers under his command. It was just that he did not have as many as the Empress Dowager. How could he be useless? It was just that it was difficult to be in the imperial city. Gong Yimo looked out of the window and said faintly, "If I were you, I wouldn't expose myself so early. I would investigate those officials who are loyal to the Empress Dowager." Cai Wuyan sneered. Did he not investigate? It was just that he did not have enough manpower and could not find any evidence. Gong Yimo continued. "Then I would plan to send those good-looking sons to the Empress Dowager's bed." Cai Wuyan was stunned. He did not understand what Gong Yimo was saying for a long time. Gong Yimo saw his silly look and sighed. "Is it difficult to drug them and send them to the Empress Dowager's bed? There are so many people in a family. You can't touch the direct descendants, but you can also touch the concubines' children. Many people are eager to get close to the Empress Dowager. Why not? Moreover, these people are not official yet. The Empress Dowager has never seen them. She would think that you are filial to her. I think you have done this kind of thing before. Wasn't this too mean?" Cai Wuyan felt as if the door to a new world had been opened for him. He looked at Gong Yimo with burning eyes. Why didn't he think of using this trick in the beginning? Women were indeed sinister. It was impossible to guard against. Chapter 463. Gong Yimo could think of these tricks even with her eyes closed. "You can't do it now. You must have shed all pretense of cordiality to get rid of the Empress Dowager. But you can find a few people to secretly seduce those gigolos, or use the excuse of being filial to the Empress Dowager to recruit male pet. The commoners may think you are muddle-headed, but they hate the Empress Dowager. This is the disadvantage of a woman. You don't know how to use it." Cai Wuyan was stunned. He never knew that Gong Yimo was such a sinister person. You must know how to make a drug to make a man unable to fall, right? Even if the Empress Dowager's camp is solid, those male pets will definitely need this drug to win the Empress Dowager's favor. If you tamper with it, the Empress Dowager won't be able to guard against it no matter how good her poison skills are. After all, which male pet will tell her that he used the drug? The more Gong Yimo thought about it, the more she felt that Cai Wuyan was a paper tiger. He looked evil, but in fact, he hadn't learned the essence of it. Also, Cai Wuyan's life wasn't as dark and twisted as his previous life. Although it was twisted, most of it was still intact and could be saved. Cai Wuyan stared at Gong Yimo's small mouth. He heard the undisguised disdain in her voice. After a while, he asked a completely unrelated question. "You haven't answered me yet. In your heart, do you also look down on me?" He frowned slightly. After a while, he sneered. His smile was mocking and evil. "Just like those people. I sincerely recruited them, but they laughed at me for being a puppet, a male pet. They said that they disdained to assist me because I didn't deserve it." Cai Wuyan stared at Gong Yimo and sneered. "In your heart, you must think of me like that. Do you also think that I'm dirty? I'm a male pet, I'm a puppet." When he said this, his expression gradually calmed down and gradually became cold and ruthless. A moment of weakness flashed in his words. Gong Yimo looked at him in puzzlement. Is it important? This question. Sai Wuyen couldn't help but glare at her. Since he had already asked, how could this question not be important? Gong Yimo frowned. Since you think it's important, I'll tell you what I really think. She glanced at Sai Wuyen's expression. He didn't show it on his face, but he was listening intently. He really cared about her. Dong Luani has taken good care of herself. She's pretty and has a great figure. She's not that much older than you. Is it really that disgusting that she forced herself on you? She asked in a low voice. He was Dong Luani's adopted son. They were not related by blood. Was it so unacceptable? Gong Yimo. Sai Wuyen gritted his teeth. Any man who was forced to submit to a woman would feel very indignant, all right? Was her brain stuffed with straw? Gong Yimo was startled by his roar. She dug her ears and pulled her face. Can you not be so fierce? I'm telling the truth. No matter what, it's the woman who is at a disadvantage. Is it that hard to accept that you just slept with a woman? Her way of thinking was ridiculous. Sai Wuyen was about to retort angrily, but Gong Yimo spoke in a low voice. If you look down on yourself, how can others look up to you? Her words surprised Sai Wuyen. He could not help but look into her eyes. Her eyes were still the same as they were 4 years ago. They were calm, tolerant, and honest. There was no deceit in them at all. A real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. As the emperor, your name will definitely go down in history. What will be remembered by the future generations is your actions and your character. When you were on the throne, did you contribute to the country and the people? That's the most important thing. As for those who were concubines or not, those are just unofficial records. Gong Yimo looked at him with disappointment. As long as you do good things, the world will remember your achievement. Unless you don't do anything, then you will be despised. In life, the most important thing is to have a clear conscience. Those who only look at your past, talk about your right and wrong, deny your efforts, and despise you are all despicable people. These kinds of people can't be used, so why care about them? When you have the ability, you can directly change the history books. At that time, will anyone stop you? Of course, the prerequisite is that you have the ability. Those who only look at your past, talk about your right and wrong, deny your efforts, and despise you, shouldn't you care? Sai Wuyen was silent for a long time before he suddenly smiled. His dazzling red clothes seemed to have a flowing light, but all of this couldn't compare to his smile. Everything in the world, could it be that people were trapped in their own cocoons? Gong Yimo, you really know how to comfort people. He laughed in a low voice. His smile came from his heart, but the words he said made people angry. But no matter how good you are at talking, I won't give you the antidote. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes at the sky. It didn't matter. She wasn't poisoned anyway. She just saw that his wound had stopped bleeding, but because he was too excited, he lost a lot of blood, so she kindly reminded him. Aren't you going to apply some medicine? Sai Wuyen didn't care. He had suffered this kind of injury many times before. Every time he did something wrong, the Empress Dowager would use him to test medicine. The process must be painful, so he was already used to it. Gong Yimo reached out to poke his wound. The sudden pain made him take in a cold breath and he instantly looked at her with a cold expression. Gong Yimo, do you believe that I won't poison your hand? Seeing his face scrunch up in pain, she couldn't endure it. Gong Yimo chuckled, and the whole carriage seemed to be filled with spring flowers, warm and sweet. Sai Wuyen's face was cold, but he didn't know why, but when he saw Gong Yimo's smug look after her successful prank, he couldn't get angry. She was like the spring sunshine, calm and relaxed, while he was surrounded by a dark night that couldn't be dissolved. In theory, he should hate Gong Yimo, but in reality, he wanted to be close to her, just like he wanted to be close to light. No, this wasn't right. Sai Wuyen coldly looked at Gong Yimo, who was looking for medicine, and secretly thought, this kind of person who would affect his mind, he should just poison her to death, right? Gong Dai found a few people from the Shui clan to test it out. He found that on this incomplete map, only pure blood from the Shui clan could show the lines. He was half happy and half worried. This was the first time he felt worried. The result was clearly in front of him, but he seemed to have lost the courage to test it out. He was afraid that he would be happy for nothing. At this time, Lo Chi sent a letter. It was from Yu Chi. Gong Dai had many people under Yu Chi. They only had one mission right now, and that was to find out news about the royal sister. Opening it, it was indeed about the royal sister. Gong Dai's lips revealed a smile, but that smile gradually froze and his face turned green. The royal sister actually had a man by her side. Who the hell was Bai Chio? Seeing His Highness push the wheelchair out, Lo Chi shouted in confusion. Your Highness, where are you going? Yu Chi. Gong Dai gritted his teeth. Lo Chi was stunned. His Highness' poison hadn't been cured yet, so he asked nervously. Why are you going to Yu Chi now? Gong Dai didn't answer. It didn't seem right to say that he caught them in the act. Thinking of this, Gong Dai's face became even scarier. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.